Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. My name is Cadence, and I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of town. It's situated just off the highway, but there's also a back entrance for the locals. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit, worn-out place where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox plays the same old classic rock songs on a loop. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional tourist who's gotten lost and is looking for a stiff drink. I like it though. The routine is predictable, the tips are decent, and I've learned to handle the usual crowd, the talkers, the flirts, the quiet ones, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends are obviously busier, but the thing about working during the week is that I do it alone. No bar back to help out, no backup at all. It's definitely slower, but I still miss having company. I stay pretty vigilant during my shifts, especially since we get the occasional bar fight, considering the kinds of crowds we attract. That's why I noticed him right away. It was well past 1:00 a.m. on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, he was in his late 40s, but he looked a little out of place. Extremely clean-cut, well-groomed, definitely not the type you'd expect in a dive bar like this. He wore a black turtleneck under a black trench coat. It was a casual but deliberate look. Something about him had an air of sophistication, like a man who didn't need to show off. The kind of money you only hear about in whispers. He glanced around before making his way to the bar and sitting down. I remember noticing how straight his posture was. It was unsettling how he carried himself. I walked over, and he scanned the bottles behind me before ordering a top-shelf whiskey. As I poured it, he casually asked if I liked working here, smiling like it was just a friendly question. I gave him a polite smile and answered honestly. Yeah, I liked it here. It was laid back. The customers were usually fine. He nodded, then said something that threw me off. Ever thought about doing something bigger? It was a strange question. Not creepy, per se, but odd. I gave him my standard bartender smile and said I was happy where I was. His face fell for just a second, and then he took a sip of his drink. The silence stretched out, and for reasons I couldn't put my finger on, I felt uneasy. He seemed disappointed, but I didn't understand why. After a long pause, he asked me what time I got off. Now, I've been in the business long enough to know when someone's trying to get my number, and it didn't sit right with me. I smiled and gave him a vague answer, hoping to brush it off without sounding rude. But he just nodded, drained his drink, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laying it on the bar as though it was nothing. Without another word, he stood and walked out into the night. I didn't know what to make of the encounter. Something about him didn't feel right, but I figured I'd never see him again. I was wrong. A week later, he came back. But this time, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. Mid-30s, dressed in a way that was just a little off, trendy, but trying too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. I could tell right away that she wasn't local. She had this calculated vibe, like she was playing a part in some movie. As they approached the bar, she smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed. The first thing she said to me wasn't hello or a drink order, but a compliment. "You're so pretty," she said, her fingers brushing against my arm as she spoke, just a second too long. I laughed awkwardly, but my gut was already telling me something wasn't right. The man didn't speak a word, which struck me as odd, considering how chatty he had been the last time. The woman went on with a bunch of small talk. How long I'd worked here, how old I was, all the usual get-to-know-you questions. But there was something about it, something that felt like she was studying me. I kept my answers short, polite, but it was like I could see the wheels turning in her head. Then she leaned in a little, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "I run an exclusive event club," she said, like she was trying to make it sound mysterious. "We're always looking for fun, young people for private parties. You'd make a killing. $10,000 for the weekend." I let out a small, nervous laugh. "Sounds too good to be true," I replied. She insisted it was real and told me a bunch of girls like me worked for them. Her smile never faltered, never slipped into anything less than unnervingly pleasant. I was already thinking about brushing her off when she casually added, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't some innocent offer. I wasn't stupid. I firmly said, "I'm good," and took a step back. But then, just as quickly, the mood shifted. A group of loud customers walked in, and her friendly expression dropped for a moment, just long enough for me to see something else behind it. Without another word, she and the man stood up and left. The whole thing left me feeling shaken, but I tried to shake it off. I told my coworkers about the encounter, and we all agreed to keep an eye out in case they came back. My boss reassured me he was just a 15-minute drive away if I needed him, and that the bar's security cameras were enough to deter any trouble. But the unease lingered. A few nights later, as I was leaving after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a coincidence, but my skin crawled. I kept my head down as I walked to my car, clutching my keys in a white-knuckled grip. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed. It stayed back just enough not to be obvious, but it was still there. Every turn I made, the car stayed behind. Panic started to creep in. I knew it was them. I forced myself to stay calm, made a random turn onto a side street, and the car followed. Still there. I had to think quickly. Without hesitation, I turned into the parking lot of a police station. My heart hammered in my chest as I pulled in. The car sped off the moment I did. For a while, nothing else happened, but I knew it wasn't over. The next time I worked, it was a slow weekday shift. By midnight, the bar was practically empty. I was cleaning up, debating whether to close early, when I heard the door creak open. It was her. I texted my boss as quietly as I could. The woman walked slowly to the bar, that same fake smile plastered on her face. I was about to tell her to leave when she spoke. "I thought I'd come check on you," she said, voice sickeningly sweet. My stomach twisted. I hid my discomfort as best I could. "We're about to close," I told her. "You'll have to leave." She pouted, but then asked for an old-fashioned. I poured the drink, trying to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. Then I heard it, the soft click of the door closing behind me. I whipped around. The woman was gone. I rushed to the front. Through the glass, I saw it, a black van, idling just outside. Without thinking, I locked the door. But then came the sound of metal rattling, the back door. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the heaviest object I could, a metal cocktail shaker, and clutched it like a weapon while dialing 911 with my other hand. I knew the police wouldn't get there in time. I considered running, but something kept me frozen in place. Then, just as I braced myself for a fight, headlights cut through the dark. My boss. The van screeched out of the lot and sped off. I rushed to him, shaking. He'd gotten the license plate. When the cops arrived, they reviewed the security footage. It was worse than I imagined. Just before the woman left, the cameras had caught two masked figures crouching near the door, waiting. There was another person in the back, banging on the door, clearly trying to flush me out. The worst part? The license plate was unregistered. It's been months since that night, and still no progress. The only good news is that my boss no longer makes me work alone, but I still feel uneasy every time I'm scheduled for a night shift. I still wonder how they knew I'd be working alone that night. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. It's a small town. Not much goes on around here, so finding things to do was always a challenge. Back in high school, a few friends and I used to sneak into abandoned buildings. That's the sort of thing you do at that age, right? I didn't realize how many people enjoy exploring old places until much later. Turns out, it's more common than I thought. One place we frequented was this old church that had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. It was in Narberth, just a few miles from where we lived. I still remember the exact address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. The place was creepy, sure, but it was our go-to spot for a little late-night thrill. One fall evening, a few of us decided to visit the church again and sneak in a little drinking. It was a chilly night, the kind where the air bites at your skin, and the smell of damp earth lingers. There were 6 of us, me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Ally. The church sat behind an 8-foot chain-link fence, the kind that kept people like us out. But that didn't stop us. We climbed over it easily enough and made our way inside. The doors were all boarded up, so we always entered through a window on the side of the building. It was a tight squeeze, but we'd gotten used to it. Once you were inside, the first thing you noticed was the floor, or lack of one. The entire first floor was just dirt. It looked like someone had ripped out the floorboards years ago, leaving only a big hole in the middle, where a set of concrete stairs led down to the basement. That's where we always ended up, the basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one of them had an actual door. The other 2 were just empty door frames. We usually started with the big room. There wasn't much in it, just some old furniture, broken chairs, and a busted-up couch. I remember having to shush Johnny at least 12 times because he was a lightweight, and the tiny bit of alcohol he had made him really loud and jittery. But being in a group always made me feel safer. Numbers were always better than being alone, especially in a place like this. We drank and laughed for a while, like we usually did. I think we even had a Bluetooth speaker playing music, though I can't be sure. Then, out of nowhere, a door slammed. I literally jumped. It was that loud. We froze, staring at each other. Concern spread across our faces. At first, I thought one of us had closed the door by accident, but no one was near it. It didn't take long before Luna, Gina, and Johnny made a break for it. They sprinted up the stairs, leaving me, Max, and Ally behind. We were the brave ones, fearless. I won't lie, my heart was pounding, but I wasn't going to let something like a door slam freak me out. I could tell Max and Ally felt the same way. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but we decided to investigate. After a few minutes of silence, we crept over to the door that had slammed shut. We hesitated before pushing it open. Behind it was a small room. The first thing I noticed was a dresser, with a cracked mirror sitting on top. The mirror had red stains smeared across it. At first, I thought it was just old paint or something, but as I got closer, I realized something far more disturbing. It wasn't dry. The stains still had that sticky sheen, like whatever it was had been there recently. My skin crawled. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and for a moment, I regretted not leaving when I had the chance. Someone, or something, had been in this room not long ago. Then I saw the picture. It was an old photo sitting on top of the dresser. A black and white shot of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something off about her expression. Something unsettling. The whole scene made me feel sick. I started to back away slowly, but just as I turned, we heard another noise. This time, it wasn't a door. It was coming from one of the other rooms, the rooms we had just left. Max and Ally immediately decided they'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue. We grabbed our things and ran out of there as fast as we could. When we climbed back over the fence and hit the pavement, none of us said a word. As I turned to look back at the church, I could have sworn I saw a silhouette of a person standing in the open window. I still pray that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never went back there together, not for as long as we stayed friends. I've been back to that church myself, though. It wasn't a church anymore when I went. By the time I finally checked it out again, it had been completely demolished. I still have no idea what we saw that night, but I'm glad my friends were there to witness it with me. Had I been alone, I might doubt that any of it happened. If anyone's curious enough to dig into the church's history, go ahead. I never found anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that place had a dark past. something we never got the chance to uncover. I was home alone one night, though I don't quite remember why. All I know is that my family was gone. I was 15 or 16, and at the time, I was deep into gaming. StarCraft had me hooked, and more often than not, I'd spend the night immersed in the game, sometimes even skipping out on sleep to keep playing. This was right before the lockdowns hit, so everything still felt normal. I was playing StarCraft in my bedroom, which was located on the first floor of our house, when the doorbell rang. I rushed to the door, not wanting to leave the game for too long. I didn't want to risk losing my progress. When I reached the door, I called out, "Who is it?" as I always did when I was home alone. A soft, weak voice on the other side responded. I couldn't make out what it said, but it sounded like a woman. I opened the door, but kept the storm door locked. Standing on the porch was an older woman, her face twisted into an unsettling smile. She had both hands hidden behind her back. "Can I help you?" I asked through the storm door. She told me she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Growing up, I was taught never to let strangers into the house. That rule applied to everyone, no matter how innocent they seemed. Yet I still felt awkward turning her away. After a brief hesitation, I suggested she head to the library a few blocks down the street. They'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was probably closed by now, but I just needed her to leave. Her smile never wavered, but then her words didn't match her expression. "That's very rude, turning away an old lady just asking for help," she said, her tone more forceful now. I stumbled over my words, trying to explain that my parents didn't allow strangers in the house. It was a house rule. Slowly, I started to close the door, still apologizing. She didn't move, but her smile grew wider, so wide, in fact, that it seemed wrong. Something was off. I turned to head back to my room when the doorbell rang again. I wasn't about to open it this time. That woman was giving me serious bad vibes. Maybe she wasn't all there, or maybe she was up to something else entirely. Either way, I wasn't going to let her in. I went back to my game, trying to ignore the strange events unfolding outside. Not long after, a sound cut through my focus, a metal clinking against the window. The noise came from directly in front of my desk. I couldn't see what was causing it, since the blinds were pulled down, but my mind immediately jumped to the possibility that it was that same woman now standing outside my window. I turned off the sound on my computer, my game forgotten. The tapping continued, persistent and unnerving. At that point, I just decided to get out of the room. I moved to the living room, sitting in the darkness, trying to collect my thoughts. But then, the doorbell rang again. This time, I was sure the woman was just crazy, probably lost, wandering around, and harmless. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. When the doorbell rang again, I finally decided to open it and ask if she needed help getting in touch with someone. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the woman standing there. Instead, a man, about 10 years younger than her, was on the other side. He looked frantic. "Have you seen my mother?" he asked, his voice strained. I nodded, feeling a little confused. "Yes, she was just here a few minutes ago." The man apologized and explained that his mother had dementia and had somehow wandered off. He then asked if he could come inside for a minute to use the phone. I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I wasn't about to let him in. I repeated the same thing I told the woman. "We can talk through the door. My parents don't like strangers in the house." He seemed to understand and asked if I could at least check the backyard, since I had heard something by the window. I reluctantly agreed and told him to go around back to search. He thanked me and walked down the front steps. I stood at the door for a moment, watching him go, before I turned around and went to the back window to keep an eye on things. I half expected to see him in the backyard, but when I looked out, there was no one there. Not him, not his mother, just empty yard. Now I was really creeped out. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to call it a night and went to bed earlier than usual. I fell asleep with the TV playing softly in the background, trying to push everything out of my mind. Then I heard it. A tapping, that same metallic clinking, right on my window again. My heart sank. I remembered the man's frantic expression and thought about his mother. Maybe I should have checked on her. Maybe I could help. I crawled out of bed and went to the window. I slowly lifted the blinds, and there she was, standing outside, that same unnerving smile plastered across her face. But this time she wasn't just smiling. She was holding a kitchen knife, gently tapping it against the glass. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Without thinking, I slammed the blinds shut and dove back into bed, feeling as though the room was closing in on me. The doorbell rang again. This time it was 4 times in quick succession. The tapping on the window had stopped, but I knew this wasn't just some harmless elderly woman with dementia. Something was off. I didn't move. I stayed in my bed, paralyzed, waiting for whatever this was to end. I couldn't even bring myself to call the police. I didn't know why, but I just felt stuck. Maybe I didn't want to seem foolish. I tried to ignore it all, hoping it would go away. Eventually, it did stop. The house fell silent again. The next morning, I called my dad and told him everything that had happened. He agreed that I did the right thing by not opening the door. He said it sounded like an attempted robbery, but there were too many strange details to make sense of it. Was the woman really suffering from dementia? Could the man have been her son? Maybe, but too much didn't add up. Why didn't he go straight into the backyard when I gave him permission to search? How did he know she had come to my house specifically? Why was he so insistent on coming inside? Too many questions, too many inconsistencies. It felt like I narrowly avoided something terrible that night. It was a cold, chilly night, and I was walking home from a party along a deserted road. The kind of night where the silence wraps around you, and every sound feels sharper. Along the way, I passed the old pink church, a building that had always been surrounded by strange stories. People in town said that if you walked by it, something might follow you. I didn't put much stock in those tales, so I kept walking, brushing off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. As I passed the church, I felt it, an intense sensation, like someone staring directly at the back of my head. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it, faint footsteps matching my pace. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself to turn around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but there was no one there. I kept walking, trying to ignore the unease building inside me. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft humming behind me. It wasn't loud, just enough to send a chill down my spine. I quickened my pace, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Fear gripped me, and I picked up my pace, practically jogging now. That's when it happened. A tap on my shoulder. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I ran, sprinting all the way home without looking back. When I finally made it home, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and bolted all the windows. My chest heaved as I called out, "Mom? Are you home?" But no one answered. The house was empty, or so I thought. Suddenly, there was a loud pounding on the front door, the kind of knock that makes your stomach drop. I stood frozen for a moment before calling out in a weak, trembling voice, "Who is it?" There was no reply. My instincts screamed at me not to answer, so I stayed where I was, heart pounding in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped and silence returned. I didn't feel safe downstairs anymore, so I ran upstairs to my room and dove under the covers, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I heard it, faint footsteps, moving around downstairs. My first thought was that my mom must have come home after all. I sat up, ready to go check, but then I remembered, the front door never opened. Before I could make sense of it, the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They were outside my bedroom now, and I could hear the door handle turning. I froze, unable to move, as the door creaked open. Standing there was my mother, or at least someone who looked like her. Her face was pale, and she was wearing clothes that seemed unnaturally bright, almost glowing. It was strange because my mom never wore white. She looked at me calmly and said, "I've been calling your name. Why didn't you answer?" I stammered, "I didn't hear you." She told me to come with her. Something about her tone fell off, so I told her I wanted to stay in bed. She paused for a moment, then said, "All right," and left. But something about the encounter gnawed at me. I had never seen my mom wear anything like that, and the way she acted wasn't normal. I crept down the stairs, trying to figure out what was going on. But when I got there, the house was empty. There was no sign of her, or anyone else. My stomach sank as I realized the front door was still locked, just as I had left it. No one had entered the house. The next morning, when my mom came home, I told her what had happened. Her face turned pale, and she told me she hadn't been home since she left that morning. Whatever, or whoever, I had seen wasn't her. From that night on, I believed the stories about the old pink church. If you walk past it, something might follow you. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I lived it, and I'll never forget it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It happened a few years ago, but every time I think about it, a cold shiver runs down my spine. I'm only talking about it now because I've convinced myself enough time has passed. I don't think it will hurt to share this on the internet anymore. Back then, my wife and I had just made the move from the city to a quiet suburb. We'd recently had our third child, and our apartment was bursting at the seams with baby stuff, toys, and the general chaos of family life. It felt like we were living in a shoebox, and we needed more space. After a long search, we found a house in a calm neighborhood that seemed perfect. The neighbors called it the type of place where you could leave your doors unlocked without a second thought. The house itself wasn't huge, but it was a massive step up from the cramped apartment we'd been in. What caught my wife's eye was the backyard. A lush, slightly overgrown garden dotted with a few old statues. They looked like something out of a Gothic novel, weathered and eerie, like they'd come straight from an old horror movie. It might sound odd, but we both liked them. It gave the yard character, she said. I wasn't fussed either way, so I just left them as they were. Less work for me, and I wasn't about to complain. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window when I noticed something strange. One of the statues, a weathered angel, was facing away from the house. All the other statues were positioned toward the house, so this seemed odd. I could have sworn they had all been facing the same direction before, but maybe I was just misremembering. I didn't think much of it at the time. The next morning, I looked out again. This time, another statue had turned around, facing away from the house. That was it. Something was wrong. I wasn't sure why, but I knew it. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged and said she hadn't noticed anything. I figured it might be my son, Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something. But when I asked him, he just stared at me confused. There was no way he had done it. I couldn't explain it, but I was sure something was going on. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. At the time, we were struggling financially, and I was terrified I'd lose my job. That was a far bigger concern for me than some statues turning around. A few more days went by without incident, and I started to relax. Then, one evening, I looked out the window, and my heart nearly stopped. All the statues were lined up at the very edge of the yard, standing in a row, facing away from the house. The sight was utterly freakish, like something from a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me felt like I could feel their eyes on me. My breath became shallow, and I froze, unsure whether to be terrified or just confused. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening the door, I nervously scanned the yard, even though it was broad daylight. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I built up the courage to open the door and inspect the statues. As I went to lift one of them, I quickly realized something. These statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do, my wife came outside. The look on her face confirmed she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe the neighbors were pranking us, messing with the new people on the block. But that didn't make any sense. We had met everyone, and they all seemed like normal folks. Besides, who would do something like this to a family with young children? This wasn't a prank. It was harassment. We ended up calling the police, but as expected, they couldn't do much. They suggested we install security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told them we would, but deep down, I didn't want to do something that drastic. They left, and I felt a little bit of relief, even though my wife was still visibly shaken. We did everything we could to keep the situation from our kids. I didn't want them to get scared. A few days passed without any new incidents, and I convinced myself that the police had scared whoever it was away. But it didn't feel over, not by a long shot. Then one weekend, it all came to a head. I don't remember exactly which day, but it was a weekend. My kids didn't have school. After breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with them. That's when I saw it, spray painted in bold black letters on the back wall of our house. Go away. I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I ushered the kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. Something snapped in me. I wasn't a brave guy, but I ran outside, screaming threats into the air, looking for whoever had done this. My heart was racing, and all I wanted was to confront them. But I couldn't find anyone in the yard. I gave up looking and started walking back to the house, the adrenaline wearing off, replaced by pure fear. Someone had left a clear, direct message, and I knew they meant to scare us. They might have been planning something worse. The situation was escalating fast, and I didn't know what to do. The police came back, but once again, they couldn't find any leads. They said it could have been some teenage delinquents. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They promised to have a patrol car nearby, but that didn't do much to ease my mind. That night, things took a terrifying turn. I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I rushed in, and she was standing by the window, pointing outside. I looked, and my stomach dropped. There were 5 figures in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing in a strange, jerky way, like puppets on strings. We just stood there, frozen in place, unable to move. It was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. I snapped out of it and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find. I yelled at my wife to call the police while I ran out the back door with the knife in my hand. I screamed like a madman and took a step toward them, then instantly regretted it. There were 5 of them and only one of me. They could have been armed. I turned and ran back into the house, feeling like a coward. But the knife must have scared them, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden, out of sight. I told my wife to grab the kids and hide upstairs, and I guarded the back door, terrified they'd try to break in. By the time the police arrived, the figures were gone. They searched the property, but found no trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care what it cost. I installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks, begging me to move somewhere else. I promised her that if anything else happened, we would, but I warned her that it might ruin us financially. Luckily, the cameras seemed to work. Those people never came back, and nothing else happened on the property. But the scariest part of all, we still live in that house, and we never got any explanation for what happened. I was 27 when I bought my first house. After years of saving, I finally had enough to put a down payment on a small but modest place. It wasn't a mansion, but I was proud of it. The hardest part about the transition wasn't the mortgage or the paperwork. It was the silence. I had lived with my parents my entire life, surrounded by 3 siblings and 2 dogs, so the house was always loud, always buzzing with life. But this place, it was quiet. Really quiet, and honestly, that was the toughest adjustment for me. Living alone after a lifetime of sharing space with family felt odd at first. I wasn't used to having my own space, and it took some time to get comfortable with the stillness. I'm sure anyone who's gone from a noisy household to living solo knows exactly what I mean. It's unsettling, at least for the first few weeks. One thing I did love about the house, though, was this tiny balcony on the second floor. I'm not sure if I can even call it a balcony. It was more like a little ledge with barely enough space to stand on. I couldn't fit a chair out there, but it was perfect for what I needed. Every night after work, I'd go out there to clear my head, enjoy a cigarette, and escape the silence inside. I hated smoking inside because the smell would linger, but the balcony was the perfect solution. It felt like a small luxury, a tiny escape from the world. To help you understand the layout, let me describe the neighborhood. The block I lived on was pretty standard, houses right next to each other, all with shared backyards, except for the tall 10-foot fences that separated each yard. From my balcony, I could see over the fence into my neighbor's backyard. And that's when I noticed something strange. After a few weeks of living there, I realized I hadn't met one of my neighbors, the one behind me. I'd seen all the others come and go, exchanged pleasantries, but this one house stood out. I never saw anyone come or go. No one waved, no one worked in the yard, no lights at night, nothing. The only sign of life was the occasional bedroom light flicking on, but I could have sworn the place was deserted. I figured it was an elderly person living there, someone who didn't go outside much. The yard was overgrown, the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in years, and the house was in need of a lot of repairs. It looked like it hadn't been touched in ages. It was the kind of place where you'd expect cobwebs in the corners. One Saturday, curiosity got the best of me, so I decided to introduce myself and at least put a face to the name. I walked around the block to knock on the door, expecting to meet some old man or woman, maybe chat for a minute. But when I got there, I was taken aback by how rough the place looked. The yard was a mess, the paint was chipped, and the walkway was stained. The doorbell didn't work, so I knocked loudly a few times and waited. Nothing. I stood there for a moment, unsure if the house was empty. But then, I saw movement behind the window shade, just a flicker, as if someone was watching me. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was in there, but for some reason, they wouldn't open the door. I turned to leave when, out of nowhere, the door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. I jumped back, startled, and there she was, an elderly Asian woman, standing in the doorway. She was short, with gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her skin was wrinkled, but her face looked tense, almost as if she were flexing every muscle in her face. Her eyes were wide, unnaturally wide, and her stare was unsettling. It was the kind of look you'd expect from someone who was either drugged or deranged. She didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me. I could feel a chill run down my spine. I finally cleared my throat and introduced myself as her new neighbor. After a long pause, she gave me a half-hearted smile, barely moving her lips. And that was it. She didn't even ask my name. She just stared at me as I nodded and turned to leave. I didn't hear the door close behind me, but I didn't want to turn around and risk looking back at her. Later that night, I went out to my balcony to unwind, trying to shake off the weird encounter. But when I looked over the railing, I froze. There she was, standing in the middle of her yard, staring up at my house. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out. She just stood there watching me. It was one of those moments where you question your own sanity. Was I really seeing what I thought I was seeing? Part of me wanted to call out to her, to wave, to acknowledge her, but I didn't. It was too strange, too unsettling. I went back inside, telling myself she was probably just an old woman with a few screws loose. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, but the image of her standing there in the dark, staring up at my house, stuck with me. The next night I saw her again, but this time she wasn't in the yard. She was moving from one window to another, peering out from inside her house, watching me from each one. I pretended not to notice, but I could feel her eyes on me. I was sure she knew that I knew she was watching me. It was uncomfortable, and I hoped it would stop, but it didn't. I saw her again the next night and the next. Eventually, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One morning, I found a woman's sock lying in my yard, on my side of the fence. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just weird behavior anymore. She had been on my property. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to confront her, but I couldn't ignore it either. That night, things escalated. I was lying in bed when the doorbell started ringing over and over again, like someone was hammering at the button, at least a dozen times, one right after the other. I didn't even need to look. I knew it was her. My heart raced and a feeling of dread washed over me. In a dazed haze, I dragged myself out of bed, put on a shirt, and went to the door. I told myself I'd ask her to leave me alone. I'd been putting it off for too long, and I was fed up. I'm not sure why I wasn't scared, but I was more annoyed than anything. I wish I could say I was thinking clearly, but I wasn't. I opened the door, and that's when everything went sideways. The second the door swung open, she lunged at me. She ran full speed at me, holding a kitchen knife in her hand. Her face was twisted in rage, and she was screaming something about how I had taken her son from her. It all happened so fast. I barely had time to process what was happening before I grabbed her arm and wrestled the knife out of her grip. I was able to pin her down on the floor, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I was terrified. She didn't stop screaming about her son. She told me she was going to kill me. At one point, she even tried to bite me. I held her down until the police arrived. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. When the officers finally arrived, they quickly restrained her and shoved her into the back of their car. I could still hear her screaming, even after they slammed the door shut. They assured me I was okay, but I was anything but. They told me she'd be sent to a psychiatric facility. After that, I never saw her again. The whole experience still weighs heavily on my mind. It was a wake-up call that I wasn't prepared for. I moved out of that house less than a year later, and I'm honestly still surprised I didn't leave sooner. I never could shake the feeling that she was always watching, always waiting. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. My wife, Taylor, and I had recently moved out of our old home. She had never been fond of being so close to her family, and after years of trying to please everyone, she finally decided we needed some space. I agreed, and we packed up our life and left. We didn't have any kids, and she had stopped working years ago, so she was pretty easygoing about the whole move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around from job to job is never a big deal for me. Eventually, we decided on a place in rural New Mexico. We've both been country folk our whole lives, so moving to a remote area wasn't exactly a culture shock. It was about 3 months ago that we made the move. We found a great deal on a property that was way out in the sticks. The house was bigger than we really needed, considering it was just the two of us and our black lab, Lola. But we figured we'd make use of the space, maybe even host friends once we settled in. We'd been living there for a couple of months when I started noticing something strange. The upstairs lights kept tripping the circuit breaker, but the rest of the house remained powered. After the second or third time, I knew exactly what the issue was. Like I said, I'm an electrician, so this kind of stuff is right up my alley. I figured it would be an easy fix, just rearranging some of the load on the breaker, likely in the downstairs circuits. It was one of those times I was thankful for being handy. I hadn't spent much time in the basement since we moved in. I remember briefly checking it out when the realtor showed us the house, but I never gave it a second thought. In fact, I didn't think I'd been down there once since then. So I walked downstairs and started searching for the main breaker. The basement was a mess, cluttered with old furniture and junk, more like a storage area than a usable space. Eventually, I found the breaker and started messing with it. After about 10 minutes, I figured out the imbalance and decided to rewire it when I had more time. I was about to head back upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured I might as well poke around since I was already down there. After all, this was my house, and it seemed odd not to know every inch of it. Most of the basement was filled with old furniture and random junk. There wasn't anything interesting, and I figured trying to turn it into a usable space would be more trouble than it was worth. That's when I noticed something strange. In the far corner of the basement, behind a pile of old chairs, was a large metal door. It wasn't just any door. It looked industrial grade, taller than most doors and much thicker. My first thought was that it was some kind of storm shelter or panic room, but that seemed odd. The realtor had never mentioned anything about a feature like that. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I went upstairs and started rummaging through the drawer of spare keys the previous owner had left us, just in case we ever locked ourselves out. After trying at least 15 keys, none of them worked on the door. Eventually, I told Taylor about it, and she was just as curious as I was. I'm still not sure how she managed it, but she somehow got in touch with the previous owners. That phone call changed everything. The owners were odd on the phone, pausing every so often, like they were trying to choose their words carefully. When I asked about the door, they fell silent. Eventually, the wife told me it was just a storm shelter, but when I mentioned that it was locked, she claimed they'd lost the key. She told me to just ignore it. It didn't sit right with me. They had left us keys to nearly every door in the house, even ones we'd probably never need. So why would they lose the key to this one? The way she said it gave me an awful feeling in my gut, but there was nothing I could do. We ended the call soon after. Taylor tried to laugh it off, telling me I was overthinking things, but I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I found myself wandering down to the basement, staring at that door, wondering what could possibly be behind it. I tried every trick I knew from work to open it, but it wouldn't budge. After a while, I gave up, but the curiosity gnawed at me. Fast forward to 2 days ago when everything took a sharp turn. At Taylor's suggestion, I hired a locksmith to get into the room. The locksmith came over, and after a while, I went down to check on him. He told me the lock was more complex than he expected for a simple panic room. Those were his exact words. I was worried he wouldn't be able to open it, but to my surprise, he managed to crack it open after about another half hour. I wish he hadn't. Inside the room, I found what looked like a shrine. The walls were covered with old black and white photographs, all adorned with strange symbols I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a chair, facing a bare wall. It looked like someone had spent a lot of time sitting there, staring at nothing. In one corner of the room was a cot, with crumpled blankets that smelled stale and faintly disgusting. Then I noticed the trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had actually been living down there, not that long ago. I couldn't believe it. This situation was starting to feel more and more sinister by the second. As I was processing everything, I spotted a second door in the far right corner of the room. It was small, half hidden in the shadows, but it was definitely there. I opened it, and to my horror, it led to a set of stairs that led right up to the cellar door inside the house. I felt like an idiot. In all the time we've been living here, I had never even opened that door. I had just assumed it led to the basement, and now, here I was realizing how wrong I had been. The pieces started falling into place. Someone had been living in my house, our house, for who knows how long. And everything started making sense. Taylor and I had noticed a few things that had been going missing. Little things usually, but I just chalked it up to misplacement, as Taylor has a habit of misplacing things. This was different. Someone had been living in my house. I had to repeat that thought over and over in my head before it really sank in. I didn't know who had been down there or why, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want them coming back. I called the previous owners demanding an explanation, maybe even threatening legal action, but they wouldn't pick up. They'd either disconnected their number or just didn't want to deal with it. Taylor was freaked out, and I was too. That night, I barricaded the cellar door with heavy furniture. I found a thick chain and padlocked it shut, just to be sure. I didn't care what it took. There was no way anyone was sneaking back in through that door. The police came and took a full report, promising to do their best to get in touch with the previous owners. We even called our realtor, who was horrified and offered to assist the police however she could. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. There was a loud bang on the front door. Lola started barking like crazy, and we both froze, staring at each other waiting. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, but then we heard small rocks tapping against our bedroom window. Taylor held on to Lola, and I went to look out. She begged me not to, but I was furious. In my mind, I was preparing for a fight. Whoever was out there was going to pay for this. I grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed, yanked the curtains open, and saw nothing. We thought it was over. Taylor wanted me to call the police, but I was so angry I wanted to handle it myself. I knew the police would scare them away, and I'd feel petty, but I needed to know who was behind this. That's when I heard it, the sound of glass shattering from downstairs. I sprinted down and saw two figures running away from the house. The kitchen window was completely shattered. I called the police immediately. They showed up not long after and searched the house, the basement, but found no sign of forced entry into the storeroom. They didn't find anyone on the property either. Their best guess was that whoever had been living down there got angry when they realized they were locked out and decided to come back to scare us. I was furious, but also horrified. Taylor's been a wreck ever since. The police escalated the situation because an actual crime had occurred, and they're working on tracking down the previous owners. But it could take days. That was 2 full days ago. We still haven't been able to get in touch with them. I think the police scared off whoever had been living here, at least for now. They haven't come back. But I still have no idea what to do if we can't get any answers soon. I'm prepared to defend myself, but I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I used to work the night shift at a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was a lonely stretch of highway, just outside of Silver Springs, a tiny, quiet town where the biggest excitement was a deer crossing the road. I say used to because after what happened to me a few months ago, I'll never take another night shift again. The station was nothing special. A worn-down convenience store attached to the pumps. Most of my shifts were quiet, especially after midnight. I spent most of the time restocking shelves, wiping down counters, or occasionally helping out truckers or late-night travelers. I could count the customers I'd get after 2 a.m. on one hand. That night, I remember it so clearly. It was just past 2:30 a.m., and even the truckers had stopped showing up. The place was dead silent, save for the faint hum of the old neon sign outside. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to kill time, when I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The cold hit me hard, and I rubbed my hands together, watching my breath fog up in the chilled night. The parking lot was empty, just the pumps, the road, and the line of trees stretching out beyond the light. The fog was rolling in thick, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, like you could almost see the moisture hanging there. I turned to head back inside, but then something caught my eye. A figure standing behind one of the pumps, almost hidden in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. How had I missed him? I hadn't seen a car pull up, and he wasn't fueling up, just standing there, facing the store with his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. There was something about him that felt off. I froze, watching him through the glass. He wasn't moving much, just shuffling in a tight, circular motion, like he was waiting for something. For a moment, I thought maybe he was just some lost traveler, waiting for someone to pick him up. But then he started walking toward the store, slow at first, then suddenly pushing through the door like he'd made up his mind. He didn't say anything right away, just stared at me with those unsettling, unblinking eyes, like he was studying me, sizing me up. Then, in a tone that was too fast and too rehearsed, he said his car had broken down just beyond the highway entrance. He needed a jump or maybe just a little gas to make it to the next town. Something about the way he spoke made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he looked at me, like he was watching for a reaction. It felt like a test. I thought about offering to call a tow truck, but before I could even suggest it, He shook his head too quickly and said he just needed a flashlight, or maybe some help checking under the hood. I was skeptical but tried to stay calm. Maybe he was just a weird guy, maybe high on something. Either way, I had to be careful. I asked him where his car was parked. He pointed toward the highway entrance. I turned to the monitor behind me, and to my surprise, there was a car parked out there, right where he said it was. My stomach sank. I'd just been outside. There had been no car when I walked out. I glanced back at the monitor, and that's when I noticed something. A shadow near the car's rear bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. A cold chill ran through me. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll help you, but I need to grab my phone from the back office." I turned slowly, careful not to spook him, but as soon as I was out of his sight, I slammed my hand down on the emergency panic button. The siren shrieked through the store. I expected him to jump, to lunge at me or something, but instead, he just stopped. All his nervous energy disappeared. His whole posture shifted. He relaxed, a slow, knowing grin creeping across his face. It wasn't a panicked smile or an awkward one. It was the kind of grin you give when you know you've got the upper hand. Before I could react, he turned and bolted out the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed to the monitors. The man didn't run toward the car. He and someone else were running straight into the woods behind the station. His car, sat there, engine off, headlights dim. No one was inside. By the time the police arrived, the car was still there. No signs of anyone having left. No footprints. Nothing. Then one of the officers pointed something out I hadn't noticed. The front passenger door was open. I hadn't seen it before. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The police took my statement, collected the footage, and started investigating. A few days later, they called. The car had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. There were no missing persons reports tied to it. No other crimes linked to the vehicle. It was just abandoned, right there, in the middle of nowhere. That was months ago, and nothing else has come of it. No new leads. No answers. I don't know what happened that night, but I do know this. I will never work another night shift again. It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and we were all more than ready for that awful year to be over. My friend Logan was hosting a party, and I got there early to help set things up. I made sure to secure a spot to sleep in his parents' room so I wouldn't have to worry about driving home later, especially since they weren't going to be home that night. Most of our close friends showed up, along with a bunch of Logan's other friends that I didn't really know. The party was fun, and when midnight hit, everyone shouted, "Happy New Year," and clinked their glasses. After that, the crowd began to thin out. Some people left for other parties. Others headed to bars or home. As the night went on, it became just our closer group of friends, hanging out and drinking in the living room. By about 3:00 a.m., most people had either left or gone to sleep at Logan's house. It was just me, Logan, and Cody, who was already passed out on the couch. At some point, we started hearing this strange creaking noise. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the fridge or something weird from the appliances. You know, those random house noises that can drive you crazy. But as time passed, the creaking started to get more persistent. It was bugging us, so we decided to check it out. We went into the kitchen, but it wasn't coming from there. As we walked toward the basement door, we realized it was coming from downstairs. Logan opened the door and called out, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped immediately. We waited for a minute, and when nothing happened, we decided to go down and investigate. We grabbed knives, even though we were drunk, which was probably the worst idea ever. If anything, we would have probably just hurt ourselves with them. But we stumbled down the stairs, determined to figure it out. The basement wasn't very big, just a couch, a TV, a bar, a table, and a bunch of random junk. It was pretty messy, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We checked every corner, trying to find something, or someone, hiding. That's when I noticed a rocking chair in the corner. It looked old, but nothing too strange. I sat in it and gave it a little rock. The chair immediately creaked, the exact same sound we had been hearing upstairs. Logan and I just stared at each other in disbelief. I stood up, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Without saying a word, we both bolted up those stairs like our lives depended on it, slamming the door shut behind us. We tried to rationalize it, but there was no logical explanation. The basement door stayed locked for days after that, until his parents came back home. The creepiest part was that there was no one down there, but something had been moving that rocking chair. Logan told me the chair used to belong to his grandmother, who had passed away years ago. His mom kept it for sentimental reasons, and it had always sat in that corner, untouched. I can't say I've had any other paranormal experiences since then, but I still get chills whenever I think about that night. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I was still with the same company, but eventually, I was able to transfer back to my hometown and work at the local office. But at the time, I was looking for a place to live that wouldn't break the bank. I posted roommate ads on every site I could think of: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, even my local neighborhood subreddit. That's when a guy named Rob reached out to me on Facebook, saying he had a room available at his place. I checked out his pictures and he seemed normal enough. Even though my parents were against me having a male roommate, I was open to the idea, especially if everything seemed all right. Rob and I had a FaceTime call, during which he gave me a virtual tour of his place. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from my office. He mentioned he owned the place outright, and everything looked fine. He was polite and seemed friendly, so I decided it was a go. A week later, I packed up all my things and drove down to meet him. When I arrived, he greeted me outside and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was that he was really short. He was eye level with me, which was a little surprising. He helped me carry in the heavier bags, and we went inside. He showed me my room, which was already furnished. He told me one of his friends had been living there but recently moved out. I replaced the pillows and bed sheets with my own, and then spent the rest of the day unpacking. Rob seemed genuinely eager to get to know me, but he didn't make me feel uncomfortable, at least not at first. The next day, Rob offered to drive me around the town and show me where everything was: shopping centers, restaurants, and so on. I wasn't eager, but I agreed just to be polite. We spent the afternoon touring the town, and then he suggested we grab lunch together. I wasn't hungry, and the idea of sitting down for a meal with him felt almost like a date, so I declined. He immediately suggested we go for drinks instead. Again, I turned him down, saying I didn't drink on work nights. He was a little pushy, insisting on just a couple of drinks, but I politely stood my ground. He eventually gave up but got uncomfortably quiet. I could tell he wasn't happy with my response, which made me feel a little uneasy. The next few days were mostly about settling into my new work routine, but that weekend, something strange happened. I was doing laundry when I noticed that my hamper seemed to be disturbed, like the clothes weren't in the same place I'd left them. When I started loading my clothes into the washing machine, I realized one of my underwear was missing. I checked my room, turned it upside down, but it was gone. The thought crossed my mind: what if Rob took it? No, that couldn't be right, but still, I didn't know what else to think. I didn't want to confront him, though. Still, I started feeling like I needed more privacy, so I bought a lockable doorknob for my bedroom from Ace Hardware. While Rob was out one day, I swapped out the old knob for the new one, hoping that would make me feel safer. That night, Rob wasn't home. He must have had a late shift or something. But then, at around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to pounding on my bedroom door. It was Rob. He was calling my name, and his voice didn't sound happy. I froze. I figured it had to do with the doorknob. I decided to pretend I was asleep, hoping he'd go away. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from him, all saying we needed to talk. I simply responded with, "Is this about the doorknob?" He said yes. I apologized and said I was planning on telling him about it. He responded that it had to come off, and I could tell from his tone that he was getting upset. Something about his attitude didn't sit right with me. I tried to explain to him that I felt safer with privacy, but he didn't seem to care. He still insisted the old doorknob had to go back on, which confused and upset me. But how did he know I'd changed it in the first place? How had he figured that out? I reluctantly changed it back to the old one the next day and returned the lockable knob to Ace. That's when things took a turn for the worse. A few days later, when Rob wasn't home, a woman around my age showed up at the house. She asked if I was living with Rob, and when I said yes, she immediately told me to get out of there. She warned me that Rob had multiple restraining orders against him from different women and was known to be dangerous. I was speechless. She had seen me move in and wanted to warn me before Rob returned. I thanked her, though I was terrified. I started packing my things right away. I found a studio apartment across town, a little more expensive, but I knew I had to get out. I texted Rob, saying I needed to leave the next day for family reasons, and he agreed to return my money. But when he came home that evening, he asked me about the text, and I gave him my best excuse. He didn't seem suspicious, but then he asked, "Did any girl say something to you?" I lied, saying no, and he dropped it. The next night, everything escalated. I woke up to see a shadowy figure sitting at the end of my bed. It was Rob. He turned and put his hand over my mouth, whispering, "Shay." I was frozen in fear. I begged him not to hurt me, and he just said, "Why would I hurt you?" He told me not to believe the women who'd said anything about him. That's when he started to touch my leg. I was beyond terrified, and without thinking, I bolted out of bed and ran for the door. Rob screamed at me to stop, but I kept going. I managed to get outside and hide behind a bush while I called the police. I stayed hidden until they showed up, and I explained everything. They made Rob come outside to talk, and I told them I just wanted to get my stuff and leave. The cops stayed with me while I packed the rest of my belongings into my car. I insisted Rob return my money, and surprisingly, he did, though he acted like nothing was wrong. While the officers were there, one of them pulled me aside and said Rob had a history of being arrested for similar incidents. Rob denied everything, of course. He said he never came into my room or touched me, but it was his word against mine. The next day, I moved into my new place, feeling safe at last. I will never, ever live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband, or anyone I don't know well enough to trust. That was an experience I'll never forget. This happened a couple of weeks ago during one of my night shifts at Walmart. It wasn't the worst job, but after a while, it felt like I was just drifting through time. The nights blurred together, the same aisles, the same routine, the same dull hum of the overhead lights. It was like I was in a constant loop, hoping something better would come along. I usually worked the electronics section. It was quieter than other parts of the store, and that was a relief, considering most of my customers at 2 a.m. were either night owls or truckers grabbing last-minute supplies before hitting the road. That's why I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just another guy, probably waiting for someone. But after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't really shopping. He wasn't even pretending to. Every time I glanced up, he was lingering nearby, hovering by the next aisle, standing unnervingly still near the clearance section. He wasn't looking at anything, just watching me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking it. The store is big, and maybe he was just taking his time. But there was something about the way he moved, always close enough for me to notice, but never close enough to interact, that made my stomach tighten with unease. For a while, I waited for him to just approach me, maybe ask for help, or strike up a conversation, but he never did. He was just standing there, like he wanted me to see him. I decided to radio someone, but when I picked it up, I realized the batteries were dead. The radio was useless. I started debating whether I should go find a manager, but before I could make up my mind, a hand suddenly grabbed my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Before I could react, a woman's voice rang out, loud, friendly, and overly familiar. "There you are," she exclaimed, like she'd been searching for me for ages. She launched into a spiel about how she'd been looking everywhere for me, and that we'd met before, as if we were old friends. I turned, completely thrown off, and saw a woman I'd never seen before in my life. She was smiling, her grip firm on my arm like we were reconnecting after years apart. Before I could say anything, she leaned in close and whispered in a low, urgent tone, "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." A cold wave of fear rushed over me. I turned just enough to glance back at him. The man was still there, only now he wasn't pretending to shop at all. He was staring directly at me, his eyes locked on mine with an unsettling intensity. I let her pull me without a second thought. The way she'd grabbed my arm and spoken to me so loudly, like we'd known each other for years, made me cling to the idea that I wasn't alone. She was helping me, right? I kept telling myself that, even as my nerves grew tighter. She continued chatting, rambling about some trip she'd taken, or maybe an inside joke we supposedly shared. Honestly, I barely processed her words. My thoughts were on him, on the idea that he had really been recording me, and the fear started gnawing at me. I kept sneaking glances behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to fully turn around. The woman guided me through the aisles, walking fast. The distance between me and the man seemed to grow with every step. Part of me expected her to drop the act at any moment, but she didn't. She just kept it up, talking and smiling, as though nothing was wrong. Eventually, it started to feel a little too weird. I glanced behind me again, relieved to see that he wasn't following anymore. Maybe I was overreacting, but I felt like I could breathe a little easier. I turned to tell her that we were good now, that I was going to find a manager, but she just squeezed my arm tighter. "He's still lurking somewhere," she said, her voice soft but urgent. Something didn't sit right. I thought about it. So what? What was he going to do in a store full of people? I started to feel a little foolish for being so scared, especially now that I wasn't alone. I pulled my arm free a little, planting my feet and twisting my arm to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said firmly, but her smile didn't fade. It stayed there, frozen and unnatural. "Come on, just a little further," she said, pulling me with more force than before. At that moment, everything clicked. We moved past the registers, past the self-checkouts, and through the quieter aisles. We were heading into the warehouse section, dimly lit and almost completely empty. Beyond that was the side exit, the one without cameras, the one employees use for loading shipments. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She was leading me straight toward the exit. I didn't hesitate. I yanked my arm free from her grip with all my strength. She let go just enough for me to escape, and I didn't waste a second. I turned and ran toward the front of the store, panic setting in as my heart raced. She shouted something behind me, yelled my name, in fact, my name, which I had never given her. I kept running until I saw one of my coworkers heading toward me, probably reacting to my screams. I told them to call security, which they did. The woman and the man were long gone by the time I finished telling my story. The security guards reviewed the footage, and as I'd suspected, the woman had been with the man the whole time. The man's face was clear as day on the cameras, but hers was always turned away, hidden from view. I started to piece it together. She was the mastermind. I could feel it. The whole thing had been planned from the start, and the cameras hadn't picked up her face in any of the frames. It was infuriating. The police got involved, and it was eventually classified as a failed abduction attempt. They tracked the man down from the footage. They should have been able to, at least. But for me, the most terrifying part wasn't the man or the woman. It was the fact that she knew my name. She had targeted me, and I don't know how or why, but that's what scares me the most. When my cousin Ethan and I were in our early 20s, we took a few camping trips around Colorado. This particular trip happened when I was 22 and he was 23, and it was in the middle of the week. Our jobs allowed us some weekdays off, so we often took advantage of the quieter camping spots during that time. It was my first time camping at Urpo Forest, though Ethan had been there many times before. We arrived in the early afternoon, parked by a picnic area, and began our hike into the woods. The trail was quiet, only the distant calls of birds and the crunch of our boots on the dry ground. After about 15 minutes, we found a good spot, a clearing large enough to fit 2 tents, a portable stove, and a campfire range. I always let Ethan take charge of setting up the camp. He was an Eagle Scout, and I was not. As usual, he had the tents up in no time. It always took me over 20 minutes to get mine set up, but Ethan was fast, efficient. He had everything under control. Next, we made a stone range for the fire, gathered some wood, and got the fire going with a fire starter and a lighter. We were cheating a little, but it worked. By the time the sun was setting, we had a crackling fire, the smell of steak and burgers wafting through the air. Ethan had always been the one to go all out on food during our trips, and he was a fantastic cook. I trusted him to take care of the meals. We had our bear spray handy, just in case, though Ethan said the chances of a black bear being around were slim. According to him, the real danger in the woods wasn't the animals, it was people. As we ate our meal and cracked open a few beers, we listened to classic rock on a portable speaker, reminiscing about old times, enjoying the vibe. The wilderness at night is something special, peaceful, yet full of unknowns. As darkness fully settled in, we started playing card games on a small folding table. We were having a great time, just the two of us, laughing, joking around, when we first heard it, a faint humming carried by the wind from somewhere in the woods. At first, I thought it was the sound of the trees creaking, but it was too rhythmic, too human. I paused the music, and we both listened, now clearly hearing footsteps, slow, deliberate steps moving through the forest, heading toward us. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Ethan. "Yeah," he replied, his voice tense. It's unusual for anyone to be this deep in the woods, especially walking by our camp like that. I was starting to feel unsettled. The humming grew louder, and the footsteps came closer, but just as quickly they faded. I tried to shake it off, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was now eerily quiet. We went back to playing cards, but this time the music was turned down to a whisper. Then, out of nowhere, a loud crash. A thick stick was thrown into the middle of our campsite, landing just a few feet away from us. We both jumped, the shock freezing us in place. "Whoever's out there, knock it off," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking slightly. The footsteps in the distance grew fainter, but they were still there, someone walking away from us. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "We should pack up and leave," I suggested, my voice shaky. Ethan shook his head. "Absolutely not. We're not leaving in the dark. If we pack up, we'll just make ourselves more vulnerable." We kept our bear spray close by as a precaution, but neither of us slept easy that night. As the hours passed, we heard more odd sounds. Branches cracking in the distance, twigs snapping. We were not alone out there. Whoever was out there was clearly watching us. Eventually, we decided to take turns keeping watch. Ethan volunteered to stay up first, reading his book by the firelight. I crawled into my tent, zipped up my sleeping bag, and tried to get some rest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At some point during the night, I woke up, disoriented, still half asleep. My eyes opened to see a head peering into my tent. At first, I thought it was Ethan coming to wake me up for my watch. "Ethan?" I mumbled groggily, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized something wasn't right. The head didn't look quite like him. It was just a shadow in the darkness. My heart started to race. "Ethan?" I said again, louder this time. Suddenly, the zipper of my tent was yanked open with a quick, sharp motion, and the head vanished. My mind raced. I didn't know what to think. I lay back down for a second, but then a sudden sense of clarity hit me. I shot up from my sleeping bag, my heart pounding in my chest. Footsteps. Someone was walking away from my tent. "Ethan?" I called out again, my voice cracking, but there was no answer. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire was dead. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I bolted to his tent and ripped open the zipper. There he was, fast asleep, oblivious to everything that had happened. Chills ran through me as I tried to process what I had just seen. I shook him awake. "Ethan, someone's out there." It took him a few moments to come to his senses, but when he did, his face turned pale. He grabbed his bear spray and cursed under his breath. I must have fallen asleep while reading. I didn't hear anything. He suggested I sleep in his tent with him for the rest of the night. Reluctantly, I agreed. We both grabbed our bear sprays and went back to his tent. I quickly grabbed my sleeping bag from my own tent, when there it was again. The humming. It was faint, but unmistakable. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Ethan. "Yeah," he said, his voice tight with fear. We zipped up the tent and huddled together, our bear sprays within reach. At that point, I would have welcomed a bear just to make it all stop. Time seemed to crawl. Hours dragged by in complete silence, except for that occasional soft humming in the distance. Finally, just before dawn, we couldn't take it anymore. We packed up our camp and hiked back to the car as fast as we could. By the time we reached the car, the sky was lightening, but neither of us wanted to stick around any longer. We could have driven to another campsite and tried to salvage the trip, but neither of us was in the mood. The whole experience had shaken us to the core. We both just wanted to get home, to the safety of our own houses, away from whatever had been stalking us in the woods. It's been 6 years since that night, and I haven't been camping since. Ethan has asked me a few times, but I've never felt the same. People are the real monsters after all. Why was someone out there stalking our campsite? Why did they just watch us in the dark? The memory of that person's face, just inches away from my tent, will haunt me forever. I don't think I'll ever camp again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me something that stuck with me. Don't be scared of ghosts. Fear the living, because they're the ones who can actually hurt you. That advice haunted me long after he passed. I was in my late teens when he took his own life, and shortly after, I received a sizable inheritance from his estate. One of the things he'd left behind was a cabin up in Oregon, near Mount Bachelor, where my mom and he had once spent their weekends. My mother, unable to afford the mortgage on her own, had put it up for sale shortly before his death. The sale was almost final, and it was clear that the place would be gone within a month. For that last month, the cabin was going to remain vacant. No renters, no guests, just empty space. I saw it as an opportunity to escape for a while, get away from the reminders of my father's death, from the questions about what had happened. I quit my job, packed my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, midnight, and drove my dad's old car up to the cabin. The first 2 days were uneventful. I spent my time snowboarding and playing with Midnight in the thick, powdery snow. Evenings were just me, my dog, a PlayStation, and some beers on the balcony while I smoked. I had stocked up on enough food, liquor, and cigarettes to keep myself going, and as far as I was concerned, I was in paradise. It was a perfect retreat, a temporary escape from everything that had happened. The cabin itself was cozy but old, 2 stories with a living room and guest bedroom downstairs, a small kitchen, and a master bedroom upstairs. The master bedroom had a small balcony. I rarely went into the other rooms, just kept the doors closed. It was the kind of place you could relax and forget the world, or at least that's how it felt for me. On the 3rd day, everything changed. It was snowing heavily, and instead of heading out to the slopes, I decided to stick around the cabin with Midnight. The area around the cabin was mostly forest, with only 2 other cabins nearby. Both were a short walk away, but they were empty. I hadn't seen anyone for days. The isolation felt good, at least until midday, when I went outside to let Midnight run around. As I looked out into the snow, I noticed something odd. Footprints. They were fresh, like someone had walked past recently, maybe 20 minutes before. It didn't make sense. No one else had been here. The footprints led away from my cabin, disappearing into the woods. I shrugged it off. Maybe someone else had rented a cabin nearby. Or maybe it was just the wind. but something felt wrong. Nightfall came, and as usual, I was in bed with Midnight when I heard it. Midnight's ears perked up suddenly. He shot off the bed and ran downstairs to the living room. I lay still, trying to calm my racing heart. I could hear him pacing down there, back and forth, sniffing at something. 5 minutes later, he came back upstairs, then did that weird doggy dance, the one he always did when he needed to go outside. I didn't think much of it. Fine, I muttered, groggily pulling myself out of bed. I clipped Midnight's leash on and trudged downstairs. But Midnight wasn't interested in going to the bathroom. The moment we stepped outside, he started pulling on the leash, leading me toward the tree line, the same place where the footprints had gone earlier. He was also sniffing around the side of the house and staring at the roof, his body stiff with tension. It didn't feel right, but I let him drag me along. Once we were outside, Midnight sat down, staring into the dark forest, unblinking, like he was waiting for something. It was like he was fixated on something I couldn't see. It was odd, but I figured there were animals in the woods. I wasn't interested in chasing any of them, so I pulled him back inside. About half an hour later, as I lay in bed trying to shake off the unease, I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. Hooves on the roof. At least that's what it sounded like. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed spaced apart like a human's stride. 6 steps, then silence. It freaked me out, but I reasoned it could have been a pinicone falling or a forest animal running around. Still, the steps had sounded too calculated, too purposeful. Midnight perked up again and ran to the screen door, barking, eager to get outside. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and lit a cigarette. I took a flashlight with me and went out onto the balcony, scanning the roof. The snow was untouched, no signs of tracks. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm myself, staring at the trees and the sky. And then I saw it. A figure crouched in a tree. It was tall, at least 8 or 9 feet. Its arms were unnaturally long and white, its fingers wrapped around the branch above it. Its face was wide open, mouth agape, but its expression was empty. I froze. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things. Was I imagining it? I turned to check Midnight, and he was pacing behind me, barking softly. The thing didn't move. It just stayed there. I debated whether to shine the flashlight toward it, but something inside me screamed not to. I backed away slowly, pulling Midnight with me, and locked the door behind us when we got inside. The rest of the night was a blur. I tried to shake off what I'd seen, but then, around midnight, I heard it. Tapping. Light tapping on the screen door, like someone gently knocking with their fingers. The sound didn't stop for an hour. Midnight stared at the door, but wouldn't approach it. The strange thing was, I felt like someone was inviting me to open that door. It felt wrong, like a trap. But then my dad's voice echoed in my head, "Stay inside. Don't do it." I listened to him, though every part of me wanted to investigate. I fell asleep eventually, but the morning couldn't come fast enough. By the time the sun was up, I packed my things and got the hell out of there. Whatever had been out there in the woods, it wasn't something I wanted to face again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I had been seeing this girl for a few weeks. We'd gone on 2 dates. Her name was Phoebe. We met on a dating app and hit it off, so we decided to meet up. She was 4 years older than me, which didn't bother me, and I thought she seemed cool. Our first date was drinks at a bar, and the second time we went out with my friends over the weekend. My friends didn't have strong opinions on her, just thought she was nice and kind of quiet. They would later reveal more about her, but I'll get to that part in a bit. Phoebe invited me to her high school reunion party. She said she didn't want to go alone, and honestly, after she'd come out with my friends and me, I felt like I owed her one. The party was set for a random Saturday in the fall, and she mentioned it wasn't organized by her school, but by some wealthy guy from her class. It was being hosted at his house, and that's where things started to feel off. I've never been to a high school reunion before, but I always assumed they were held at bars or banquet halls. When we pulled up to this guy's house, I was a little taken aback. It was a massive mansion, the kind that looked like it belonged in some fancy suburb. Gated driveway, beautiful architecture. But there were no cars parked outside, not even fancy ones. I figured the host must have parked his car in the garage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As soon as we stepped into the house, I felt eyes on me. It wasn't just Phoebe getting attention. They were all staring at me. A few people came up to her, hugging her and greeting her like they'd known her for years. Then they turned to me. The questions started right away. Questions about my life, what I did for work, who I lived with. It felt like an interrogation. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were sizing me up. Phoebe eventually pulled me away to introduce me to more people, but it didn't get any better. These people asked weird, personal questions, and I couldn't help but notice that they didn't look like they were in their late 20s like Phoebe had said. Some of them looked closer to their mid-30s, maybe even 40s. I mentioned this to Phoebe, and she casually brushed it off. "Yeah, some of these people aren't aging too well," she said. I asked if she knew everyone there, and she said, "Yeah, I remember them." I tried to shake it off, but the more I looked around, the stranger everything seemed. The atmosphere in the house was uncomfortable too. No music, no laughter, just quiet chatter and strange stares. It was like being at a party where you didn't belong. I asked Phoebe who the host was, but she said she hadn't seen him yet. By now, I was starting to feel more and more out of place. At one point, I turned to Phoebe and said, "I'm gonna go to the bathroom for a second." But honestly, I didn't need to go. I just wanted to get out of the room and away from all the uncomfortable stares. I didn't have a drink in my hand or anything to calm my nerves. I just wandered through this giant house, feeling more and more like I didn't belong. Every person I passed stared at me like they were studying me. I found the bathroom and locked myself in, even though I didn't have to pee. I just needed a moment to breathe. Sitting there, I texted my friends about how weird everything felt, and how I was thinking of convincing Phoebe to leave soon. We'd been there for about 30 to 45 minutes, and still, the mysterious host hadn't made an appearance. Phoebe texted me, "Where are you?" I replied, "In the bathroom. Give me a minute." Then I added, "This party is really weird. I'm down to leave soon." Before she could respond, someone knocked on the bathroom door. I jumped. I quickly washed my hands and opened the door to find a guy standing there. He looked like one of the younger people at the party, but his face was serious. He leaned in close and whispered, "You should leave. That girl isn't who she says she is." I froze for a second, not sure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked. He said, "Whatever she told you her name is, that's not her real name." He then asked what she told me the party was, and I told him. She said it was her high school reunion. He smirked. "Do these people look like they're at a high school reunion?" I was starting to feel my heart race. This guy was looking at me like he was trying to warn me. He finished by saying, "Trust me, leave sooner than later," before he walked into the bathroom and shut the door behind him. I didn't know what to think. Was he telling the truth? I didn't want to stick around to find out. I didn't even bother knocking on the door to get him to explain. It was too late for that. I was already feeling like I'd walked into something much darker than I realized. I left the bathroom and walked straight to the front door. The whole time, I could feel eyes on me, like everyone in the house was watching me. I didn't care. I wasn't about to stick around. I kept my head down, walked out the door, and headed straight to my car. When I got home, I checked Phoebe's number on White Pages just out of curiosity. What I found made my blood run cold. Her number wasn't associated with the name Phoebe. The name listed was Claire Foster. The address I had picked her up from both times didn't match anything on White Pages either. It was a completely different address than the one that came up. That's when I realized I had never seen her leave the house. She was always just waiting on the sidewalk when I picked her up. Every time. Phoebe texted me asking where I went. I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked her number. My friends made jokes about the whole thing afterward, calling her weird from the start. They said they didn't want to tell me their concerns, but now it seemed like they had been right. One of my friends even joked that it sounded like I was in a scene from Get Out. Some of my family and friends thought I was exaggerating the whole thing, but when I told them about the fake name and the guy's warning, they stopped laughing. Something wasn't right about Phoebe or Claire Foster, and I had no intention of ever finding out what. It happened when I was just a kid, probably around 8 years old. My parents had me late in life, and my two older siblings were both at least 10 years older than me. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to hear noises coming from downstairs. It was my parents, but something didn't sound right. I cracked my bedroom door open and listened, hearing them arguing about something, though I couldn't make out what it was. I called out from the top of the stairs, "Mom? Dad?" My mom appeared at the bottom of the stairs and said in a hushed voice, "Go back to bed." I did as she asked, though I could tell they were both clearly stressed about something. I tried to go back to sleep, but then I heard the front door slam shut. After that, everything went eerily quiet. I assumed they had left, but I wasn't sure why. Regardless, I listened to my mom and went back to bed. A short while later, I woke up again. This time, I heard the front door creak open, followed by soft footsteps. I assumed my parents had come back, but they were being quiet, probably to avoid waking me. I listened carefully as I heard footsteps move around downstairs, the sound of drawers and cabinets opening and closing, and what sounded like the fridge door opening. I thought it was my older brother, Chris, coming home late. At the time, he was already driving and would often come back around 2 a.m., raiding the fridge. It wasn't unusual for him to make noise like that. But the more I listened, the more my mind started to convince me this was just Chris, rummaging around in the kitchen as usual. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. They grew louder and closer until they reached the top of the stairs. I held my breath as I lay still, eyes wide open, staring at the doorway. The door to my room creaked open slowly. I didn't move. I didn't sit up, just stared. There was no light in the hallway, so all I could see was a dark shadow in the doorway, the shape of a head. I called out to whoever it was, first Chris, then Mom, then Dad, but no one answered. The shadow didn't speak. Instead, the door gently closed behind it. I was left lying there, confused and a little creeped out. The footsteps retreated, heading back downstairs. I figured it was my dad, coming to check on me after he got home. But I didn't understand why he'd ignored me when I called out. A few moments later, I heard silence again, so curiosity got the better of me. I crept downstairs in the dark, making sure not to turn on any lights. As I approached the kitchen, I froze. There was someone standing in the middle of the room, a tall figure, so still it almost felt like they were part of the shadows. I whispered, "Dad," assuming it was him, but a deep voice answered, "Go back upstairs." I didn't even think. I ran back up the stairs, slammed my door shut, and dove under the covers. My heart raced, but all I could think was how strange my dad's voice had sounded. It wasn't until later that night when the front door opened again, and I heard commotion downstairs, voices I knew to be my parents. I rushed to the top of the stairs again, and they seemed just as shocked to see me awake. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mom told me, "Chris had a little accident, but he's going to be fine." I didn't fully understand at the time, but I learned months later that Chris had gotten into a car accident that night, driving in a condition he shouldn't have been in. My parents had rushed to the hospital, leaving me alone at home. I asked my dad if he'd come into my room earlier that night. That's when I learned they had been gone for hours. My mom flipped out, yelling at my dad because he'd forgotten to lock the door when they left. I told them about the person I'd seen in my room, the figure in the kitchen. My dad immediately grabbed his gun, and my mom called the police. I was asked to give a statement to the officers. My parents later told me they felt ridiculous explaining to the cops how they'd left the door unlocked and me alone. Nothing was stolen from the house, but whoever had broken in clearly didn't have any intention of harming me. Still, Having a stranger in your house when you're just a kid is one of the most terrifying things to experience. Imagine being 8 years old, alone, in the dark, hearing someone walking around in your house when you're supposed to be safe. I once worked as a night caregiver for a 65-year-old woman named Martha. Her daughter, Colleen, was in her 40s and worked the overnight shift, so she needed someone with medical experience to look after her mother during the night. I was a direct care worker for a couple of women with developmental disabilities already, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I spent in their home. Colleen hired me for a single night to care for Martha, who had dementia. The family didn't seem to have other options. Maybe it was a matter of money, or maybe it was simply easier for Colleen to keep Martha at home, even if it was taking a toll on her. I met Martha when I arrived. She was sweet and smiled at me as Colleen introduced us. Colleen explained that Martha sometimes wandered around at night, confused, and I might need to help calm her down and guide her back to her room. Colleen assured me this wasn't sleepwalking, but rather a symptom of her dementia. I told her I'd be fine, and everything would be okay. Colleen left for work, and I spent the evening in the living room, watching TV to pass the time. It wasn't glamorous, but most of the time, these jobs didn't require much more than sitting around. But then, I heard it. Footsteps from upstairs. I went to the base of the stairs and called out for Martha, but she didn't respond. After a moment, I heard her steps retreat back to her room and the door shut. Maybe she just needed the bathroom, I thought. An hour later, I went to the kitchen for a sandwich I'd brought. As I walked out of the kitchen, plate in hand, I nearly dropped it in shock. Standing at the end of the hallway, at the foot of the stairs, was Martha. The glass on the floor was shattered all around her. I rushed toward her, concerned. "Martha, are you okay?" I asked, but she screamed, "Who are you?" I was taken aback and reminded her that I was her caregiver, the one Colleen had hired to watch over her. Martha didn't seem to recognize me. "I don't know you," she screamed, her voice rising. I gently guided her back upstairs to her room, calming her down with a glass of water and some melatonin to help her sleep. I was beyond exhausted, but decided to get some rest. Colleen had said there was a spare room upstairs, so I laid down on the twin bed. I felt like Martha had finally fallen asleep with the help of the melatonin, but I barely slept an hour. The sound woke me, a constant slamming noise coming from downstairs. It was rhythmic, like something was being slammed repeatedly. My heart raced. I rushed down the stairs, carefully, trying not to make a sound. As I reached the bottom, I turned the corner into the kitchen, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Martha was standing in front of the oven, opening and slamming the door again and again. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. "Martha?" I called out, and she stopped. She closed the oven door with a sharp bang and turned toward me. Her face was unreadable as she approached, her movements slow, deliberate. "Are you okay?" I asked, but she didn't respond. Her expression was completely blank. She walked right past me, heading back up the stairs. I followed her, unsure of what to do, until she slammed the door to her room. I knocked gently, asking if she was all right, but she didn't answer. So I cracked the door open, just a little, to peek inside. I almost froze in place. Martha was standing at the side of her bed, facing the wall. It was unsettling, like something out of a nightmare. I approached her carefully, trying to gently ease her into bed. I covered her up and said good night, hoping this would be the last time I'd need to check on her. Then I returned to the spare room to try and get some sleep. I stayed awake for a while, just in case she woke up again, but eventually drifted off. The room was pitch black when I woke up again, but this time it wasn't the sound of slamming. It was the faint, slow creak of the closet door. I blinked in the darkness and noticed the door was slightly ajar, and from inside I saw a shadowy figure peeking out, a head just visible in the crack. My heart nearly stopped. "Martha?" I whispered, but she didn't answer. I called her name over and over, my voice growing more frantic. Finally, the door creaked open, and there she was, moving toward me, holding something in her hand. A large kitchen knife. "Who are you?" she screamed, her voice hoarse, wild. I could feel the fear building in my chest. My instincts kicked in, and I backed away, my mind racing. I tried to calm her down, but the fear was too much, and I was no longer concerned for her. Now I had to protect myself. I scrambled to the side of the bed and leaped past her. She swung the knife in the air weakly, but I didn't care. I ran for the stairs, grabbed my shoes, and bolted outside into the cold night air. Instead of calling 911, I did what Colleen had told me. I called her. I could hear her panic through the phone as I explained what had just happened. Martha had tried to kill me. Colleen was furious, yelling for me not to leave, but at that point, I couldn't care less. I was just trying to stay alive. When Colleen finally returned, she found Martha back in bed, asleep. She didn't believe me at first, until she saw the knife next to Martha's bed. Still, Colleen seemed to think I was exaggerating the whole thing. I didn't care. I left out the fact that I'd been trying to sleep, but I didn't feel guilty for what had happened. I never worked in that house again. Martha was the scariest patient I'd ever had in my 9 years as a direct care aide. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was the last day of school, and I was in the 4th grade, the last year when kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders could walk home on their own. My mom always picked me up on the final day, but this time was different. I had a playdate planned with my friend Dennis to celebrate. Dennis and I weren't in the same class that year, but we'd been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway, so we were separated after school. I lined up with the rest of the kids and waited outside the doors by our teacher, Miss Blue. The parents were swarming, picking up their kids from the parking lot. I kept scanning the crowd, waiting for my mom, but then I heard someone call my name. Tommy. I turned around and saw a man waving at me. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was there to pick me up. I didn't think twice. I walked over to Miss Blue, told her that I was being picked up, and pointed to the man who was waving at us. She looked at him and then waved me off. We walked through the crowd, and this man spoke quickly, almost too quickly. He had a jittery energy, like he was nervous or excited. He told me his brother, Dennis's dad, was working late, so he was giving me a ride instead. He moved fast, like he was in a hurry, and I struggled to keep up, my backpack bouncing with each step. But then, something struck me. Where was Dennis? Why wasn't he with us? I asked. Where's Dennis? The man glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his smile twitching nervously. Oh, he's already at home. I didn't really know how to respond. I just sat back in the seat, trying to ignore the feeling in my gut. The man kept talking about his old school days, asking me questions about sports and what we were learning in class. But I wasn't paying attention. Something didn't feel right. The drive was longer than usual. My house was only a 5-minute walk from the school, but we were in an unfamiliar neighborhood, and the streets felt emptier. He finally parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. It looked normal enough, just another suburban home, but it felt off. Too quiet. He led me inside and shut the door behind us, locking it with a soft click. The inside was dark, darker than I expected, like it was night. All the curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a dim lamp in the corner of the room. I looked around, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Where's Dennis? I asked again, my voice small. He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. Oh, I think he's downstairs. He's playing video games. Wait here for a second. He disappeared into a nearby room, and I heard him descend a set of stairs. That's when I knew. I was in danger. I panicked. The door had locked behind me, and I tried to open it, but it was stuck. There was no way out. I quickly scanned the room and saw an old phone mounted on the wall. My heart raced as I grabbed the receiver and dialed 911. My voice barely a whisper, I managed to say, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They acknowledged me, but I didn't say anything else. I tucked the phone under a towel in the corner of the room and tried to calm my breathing. I couldn't let him hear me. I barely had time to hide when I heard him coming back upstairs. He called my name. "Tommy, come down. Dennis is down here." I didn't respond. When he came up to check on me, he looked right at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I felt sick. I asked, "Can I leave?" I could see the change in his face, his fake smile slipping. The man's eyes darkened as he stepped closer. Before I could move, he grabbed my wrist hard, pulling me toward the basement. I screamed and cried, begging him to let me go, but he only shouted back, "I'll let you go if you stop screaming." I had no choice but to follow him. I stumbled down the stairs into an unfinished basement. The floor was cold and concrete, with a single support beam running through the center. The yellow light of a hanging bulb flickered ominously above. This was where I knew something terrible could happen, but I didn't dare imagine what. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach drop. I heard the lock click. He left, but I could still hear his footsteps above me, pacing around the house. I waited in the basement, my heart pounding in my chest, until I heard the doorbell ring 3 times. Then, loud banging. It was the police. They weren't at the door yet, but I heard the banging growing louder. The doorbell kept ringing, and I could feel the weight of the moment. Then, a final bang, followed by shouting voices. I screamed as loudly as I could, banging on the basement door. The door burst open, and a police officer grabbed me, pulling me out of the basement and into the light. There were cop cars everywhere. The man was handcuffed and dragged to one of the cars. I didn't know if he would ever get out. My parents arrived shortly after. My mom was crying, and my dad was angry. The whole scene at the school had already unfolded by then. Dennis's dad was beside himself when he found out what had happened. The man was a work associate of Dennis's father. He had seen Dennis and me at school before, and when he learned that Dennis's dad was supposed to pick us up, he'd taken his chance. He didn't even know how he'd found me. Maybe it was luck, or maybe it was something darker. My parents put me into counseling for months after the incident. I can't help but wonder, if I hadn't thought to call 911 when I did, I wouldn't have made it out. The whole thing happened 17 years ago, and sometimes I still wonder, is he out there now? I live a pretty straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm confident that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't some drunken hallucination or a product of exhaustion. It was real. I live on the outskirts of a typical small town in Tennessee, surrounded by nothing but woods and country roads. A few of my friends live farther out in the middle of nowhere, places that are only accessible via these dark, winding back roads. One of them, Darren, lives with his family in an upscale neighborhood, one that's tucked away in the forest, where you can only get to it by these back roads. Every year, Darren's family throws a big party for New Year's Eve, and they invite all their friends, including me. It's always a fun time, and I look forward to it. The weather around here can be pretty unpredictable during winter, so it wasn't until a few days before New Year's Eve that the cold really hit. I remember the sudden chill in the air and the bumpy, poorly maintained roads made for a pretty uncomfortable drive. Normally, I don't use my brights because I hate when other drivers blind me, but the pitch-black country road ahead made it a necessity this time. Even with the brights, it was hard to see the twists and turns, especially with the dense trees that lined both sides of the road. The only sign of civilization between my turnoff and Darren's neighborhood was this old, run-down shack that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Strangely, I'd sometimes see lights on inside when I drove by. As I passed that stretch of road, I noticed something ahead, something white against the dark. I slowed down, and as I got closer, I saw a figure standing motionless at the side of the road. It was a woman dressed in a white gown or dress, the kind of outfit that didn't make any sense for this weather. She wasn't moving, wasn't hiding, just standing there, facing the trees. I didn't turn off my brights, keeping a cautious distance. I couldn't make out any details in the glare, but I was thankful she didn't step out into the road, forcing me to stop. I did consider stopping to check if she needed help. Maybe she was another guest on her way to Darren's party, but when I glanced back in the rearview mirror, I froze. The woman had turned and was following me, standing perfectly still in the same spot. The red glow from my taillights illuminated her as I drove away. That was weird. Maybe she was a fellow guest, but I wasn't about to turn around and find out. I got to Darren's house without incident around 8 p.m., parked among the cars in the gravel circle out front. The house was situated in a large clearing surrounded by trees, just like the rest of the neighborhood. We partied until we rang in the new year, watching the ball drop in New York and waiting for the midnight countdown in our own time zone. After that, people slowly started heading home. I stayed behind to help Darren's parents clean up, as I always did. By the time I left, my car was the only one left in the driveway. As I started my engine, the tire pressure light flickered on. My car's a bit old, so it doesn't give me specific details, but I knew this kind of thing always happens when the weather changes abruptly. I figured I'd be fine to get home, but then I remembered that woman. Was she still out there? Had anyone else seen her? There was another route I could take to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes to my trip. And I didn't want to deal with that at this hour, especially with all the drunk drivers around. So I decided to just suck it up and take the same route back. I really wish I hadn't. Not even 5 minutes down the road, I noticed something felt off. I heard it first, like a metal scraping against the pavement. My car slowly came to a complete stop. I muttered under my breath, wondering if the tires had fallen off. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car. The second I shut the door, the car's lights turned off, and I was plunged into the cold, suffocating darkness of the forest. Using my phone's flashlight, I checked my tires. My stomach dropped. Every one of them had been shredded, ripped apart like an animal had done it. It didn't make sense. One tire could have gotten damaged, maybe, but all four. This wasn't some accident. It was deliberate. I stood there, unsure of what to do. There's no cell service this deep in the woods, so I couldn't even call for help. But then, just as I was about to get back into the car, the wind stopped. The leaves hanging from the trees stopped rustling. All the usual nighttime sounds just vanished. It was completely silent, like the world had paused for a moment. Then I heard it. A snap, a twig breaking from somewhere in the trees. Something was moving. I quickly turned off my phone light, plunging everything into darkness. The rustling continued, but it wasn't the usual noise you hear from an animal. This was the sound of something stalking me. My heart started pounding, and then I heard it. A voice. Soft, quiet, but clear. I see you. Every muscle in my body went rigid. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice was coming from the tree line, only about 15 feet away. It wasn't menacing, but it was worse. There was something unnervingly calm about it. Then I heard it again. Can you see me? That's when the fight or flight instinct finally kicked in, but I was too disoriented, paralyzed by fear. I fumbled with my phone to turn the light back on, then aimed it directly in front of me. Standing there, right at the edge of the woods, was the woman. Her gown was filthy, covered in dark stains. Her skin was deathly pale, her body thin and frail. Her long gray hair hung down to her elbows, tangled and disheveled. Her face, I can't even describe it. Half her jaw was missing, like she was trying to grin at me with a mutilated, skeletal smile. I couldn't take it anymore. My body reacted before my brain could process what was happening. I turned and ran. The shack that I had passed earlier was in the opposite direction, but what if she was from there? I didn't know, and I didn't care. I sprinted down the road, adrenaline pumping. I could hear twigs snapping and leaves rustling behind me. She was chasing me, but I was faster, fueled by fear, and somehow I lost her in the darkness. When I reached Darren's house, I didn't even think about the rest of the neighborhood. I pounded on the door, begging for it to open. Darren's mom answered, seeing the fear in my eyes, and pulled me inside. I told them everything. Darren, his parents, and anyone who would listen. They offered to let me stay the night and called the police, while Darren's dad arranged for a tow truck. I was too shaken to even think about calling my own family. The police said they'd search the area that night, but honestly, I just wanted to forget about everything. I crashed in the guest's bedroom, hoping to sleep through the night. But then, around 3:14 a.m., I heard it, light taps at the window. I glanced at the clock, and the fear hit me all over again. I wasn't about to look outside, but then a voice came through the darkness. "I see you." The woman had followed me here. She wasn't done. She was still out there, throwing rocks at the window to get my attention. I stayed frozen in bed, too terrified to move. I wasn't about to open the window or go anywhere near it. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, Darren's family and I went outside. We looked around, but there was no sign of her. The police came soon after, and Darren's dad found something strange in the yard, a rusty knife. It clearly didn't belong to the family. That's when we realized the woman had been stalking me all night. She'd followed me from the party, targeted me, and slashed my tires. When the police questioned the other guests, one of them mentioned seeing a woman in a white dress walking around outside, but they didn't think much of it. They assumed it was someone coming or going. When I gave my statement, I suggested they check the shack by the road where I'd seen her before. They did, but there was no one living there. However, they found something disturbing, dead, gutted wildlife scattered around the surrounding woods. As for the woman, she was never found. And I can't stop wondering, how did she track me down so quickly? How could someone who was missing half her face speak so clearly? The questions keep me up at night. I'll still be going to Darren's house for New Year's Eve this year, but next time, I'll carpool and I'll take the long way around. When I was 26, I took a trip to San Diego to visit an old college friend. I flew in, and after spending a few days there, I booked a late-night flight back home to Sacramento. My flight landed just after midnight, and by the time I got through baggage claim and to the taxi pickup, it was already around 12:30 a.m. I waved down a random cab and gave the driver my address. He agreed to take me home for $30, which felt like a steal compared to Uber. The driver got out to help me with my bag, but I told him I was fine with it sitting next to me. He placed it on the passenger seat behind him, and I settled into the diagonal seat across from him. We started driving, and as we merged onto the highway, I noticed the driver kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. The second time he did it, he asked, "Where are you coming from?" I answered, "San Diego." He smiled and said, "Very nice." Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Is your friend as pretty as you?" I laughed, trying to brush it off, but the comment was definitely creepy. It was the third thing he'd said to me, and it only added to the unease I was already feeling. The questions continued on a flirtatious tone. "What's a pretty girl like you doing traveling all by herself?" I shot back with a bit of sass. "I told you I wasn't alone. I was visiting a friend." He then said, "Well, by flying alone, you're traveling by yourself." I was getting more uncomfortable by the second, but I just replied, "We can agree to disagree." He chuckled and said he was just teasing me, but the whole thing felt off. The guy was probably in his 40s, and it just didn't sit right for him to be hitting on a woman in her 20s like this. We continued driving, and I started to zone out, trying to ignore the conversation, but my mind was on high alert. After a while, I noticed we were passing my exit on the freeway. "Hey, that's my exit." I called out, but instead of slowing down, he kept driving. "That was my exit." I repeated, more forcefully this time. He apologized and said he'd take the next exit, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. When we reached the next exit, I clearly told him, "You need to get off here." Without acknowledging me, he turned on the blinker and merged onto the exit. For a split second, I saw him glare at me through the mirror, and there was something unsettling in his gaze, like annoyance, maybe even anger. I decided to take control and said, "Yes, I have a boyfriend." It felt like the perfect answer to shut him down. But then he asked, "What's his name?" That was it. It crossed a line. I instantly popped in my AirPods, hoping he'd get the hint, but my phone wasn't even charging, so they were nearly dead. I just wanted to get home. At this point, I texted my family and close friends about the creepy taxi ride, sharing my location just in case. We were in my neighborhood now, but the streets were eerily empty, no cars at all. We came up to a red light, and I noticed him glaring at me again through the rear view. I had no music playing, so I would have heard him if he spoke, but he just stared. The light turned green, and he started moving again. Suddenly, I felt a wave of dread. My brother was the only one still awake at that hour. He told me I should leave the car if I felt threatened, and I agreed. We stopped at another red light, and again, I saw him glaring at me through the mirror. Just then, I spotted a police car parked in a vacant lot. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and yanked open the sliding door. "What are you doing?" The driver yelled, but I ignored him and bolted out of the van. The moment I hit the pavement, I started running toward the police car. Instead of chasing me or getting out to argue, the driver just sped away. The cop saw me coming and rolled down his window. I told him I had a bad feeling about the driver and that I'd gotten out of the car for my safety. He offered to give me a ride home, and thankfully, I accepted. I couldn't believe the taxi had just driven off like that, leaving me on the side of the road at nearly 1:00 a.m. The officer dropped me off at my apartment, and I locked the door behind me, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. But just as I collapsed onto my bed, there was a loud knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Was it the driver? He had my address. What if he was here for his money? Or worse? The knocks persisted for several minutes before stopping, but I didn't leave my room. I just stayed frozen, listening to the silence. The next day at work, I got a call from my neighbor George. He told me my dad had come by to drop something off, but hadn't had a key to get in. He asked if I was expecting him. I hadn't heard from my dad, so I called him right away. My dad said he was at work and hadn't come by. I told him about the taxi driver situation, and he insisted I come stay with him for a few days. I agreed, and after work, I packed my things and headed to my parents' house for the night. At my parents' place, I felt safe, but something still nagged at me. That whole night felt off. I could hear creaks in the floorboards, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was the same feeling I'd had during the taxi ride. Only this time, I was alone in my apartment, and I didn't know who or what was lurking. Just when I was ready to leave, I heard a sound coming from the hallway, a soft creak. Then, a voice from behind the wall. "I wasn't going to hurt you." I saw an arm reach around the corner of the spare bedroom, and without thinking, I bolted out the door, screaming for George. His door was open, and he and his wife rushed outside to help. We called 911, and when the police arrived, they checked my apartment. The sliding back door to the shared backyard was open, suggesting the intruder had escaped that way. They didn't find anyone, but the whole situation was unsettling. I didn't have much information to give them, except for the description of the driver and the yellow minivan. They couldn't trace anything from the ride, and the taxi didn't show up in any of the local security footage I suggested they check. My dad installed cameras on my doors when I got back, and I bought a taser, just in case. I've lived in 2 different apartments since then, and I've never had to use the taser, but I'm extra cautious. I still avoid taxis now. After all, you hear about fake taxi drivers doing terrible things all the time. I can't help but wonder if that was even a real taxi, or if it was a stolen vehicle. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened when I was 18, and I'm 22 now. I live in San Antonio, Texas. It was my senior year of high school, but this was back when COVID-19 was just starting to blow up, and everything was shutting down, especially my school. Even though everyone was supposed to be staying home and quarantining, My friends and I ended up going out more than ever. There wasn't much to do since all the non-essential businesses were closed, but one thing about me, I love urban exploration and exploring abandoned or haunted places. I still do to this day. I'm not someone who scares easily. I've had some close calls, once even had a gun pointed at me, but nothing compares to the weirdness and terror I experienced one night while exploring. During this time, I started talking to a girl in my high school class named Clarissa. We were still in the early stages of dating, but somehow I convinced her to explore a forested park with me at 3:00 a.m. in San Antonio. The park's called Opeach Park, beautiful and peaceful during the day, but eerie at night. It's an isolated park in a residential area, but it has a shady reputation, with multiple incidents of violence in recent years. In 2016, a young woman named Lauren Bump was brutally murdered in these very woods, and in 2021, a young guy exploring the park was shot. It's a place that should be avoided after dark. We arrived at the park at around 3:00 a.m., and the atmosphere was unsettling. The trees completely blocked out the moonlight, leaving us in pitch black. I don't like using a flashlight because it messes with my night vision, and I didn't want anyone to spot our lights from far off, so we walked in total darkness. We probably made it about 20 minutes along the main trail when I decided to take a side trail that would loop back to where my truck was parked. I didn't want to stay in the park for too long. It felt off, too quiet, like something wasn't right. Clarissa agreed to take the side trail, and we started walking in that direction. We hadn't been on the side trail for more than a couple of minutes when, out of nowhere, we heard a flute begin playing. It was soft at first, but it definitely wasn't just background noise. It was deliberate, like someone was playing a song. Clarissa and I froze in our tracks, exchanging looks, listening. The music was haunting, perfectly in tune, as if it were from some forgotten lullaby. I know this sounds weird, but it didn't feel natural. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. Then things got strange. As we stood there, I could hear Clarissa begin to tremble beside me. She started praying, whispering to God, asking for forgiveness. I was listening to the flute, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the main trail, maybe 30 to 50 yards away, but it was growing louder, much louder. Soon, it felt like it was right on top of us. Clarissa's fear was contagious. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. I didn't scare easily, but something was off, and I knew I had to keep us calm. "Don't worry," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." I told her we should run down the side trail and get out of there. We began sprinting. I didn't hear the flute anymore, but I was more focused on getting the hell out of that park. We had only covered about 30 feet when, suddenly, the sound of bushes rustling and twigs snapping echoed behind us. Something large darted across the trail, just in front of us. My heart skipped a beat. It could have been a deer or some other animal, but it felt like whatever it was huge. I didn't see anything, though. There was no shape, no silhouette, and I didn't hear it approaching or running away. It was like it appeared out of thin air. We bolted the other way, heading back toward the main trail, adrenaline pumping. As we neared the spot where we had heard the flute earlier, it started up again, louder than before. The eerie melody seemed to be waiting for us. This time it sounded like an Irish jig, the music still rhythmic but unsettling. The sound was everywhere. It was surrounding us, closing in from all directions. My fight or flight instincts kicked in. We were trapped. One direction was the side trail where we had heard something dash in front of us, and the other was the main trail where the flute was playing. The main trail was better. At least it was paved. So I told Clarissa, "We have to make a run for it." We ran, and I'm telling you, we ran fast. The adrenaline made my legs feel like they were on fire, but I didn't stop until we finally reached the truck. We didn't even talk. We just got in, and I sped off, looking in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see something chasing us. The next day, I told my friends about what happened, but no one believed me. I searched the internet, trying to find any stories about strange flute music being heard in the woods, but nothing. People talk about haunted forests, ghosts, cults, and even strange animal sounds, but never a flute. I kept trying to come up with a rational explanation, like maybe some houses near the woods were playing music, but no way. We were deep in those woods, and that sound was crystal clear, like it was coming from right in front of us. I never went back to that park at night. Sure, I still explore creepy places, but that experience has stayed with me. That flute, and whatever dashed in front of us, still gives me chills when I think about it. I'm 20 now, working as a pharmacy tech in a medium-sized hospital in northwest Alabama. My shift is 6:00 p.m. to 4:00 a.m., and I work 7 days straight before getting 7 days off. I don't mind the days off, but the week on is brutal. One Tuesday night, after working a long shift, I left early to spend some time with my wife at her aunt's house. She'd been babysitting her cousins while her aunt and uncle were away, and she was feeling uneasy staying there alone. The house didn't have curtains, so she felt exposed. I couldn't make it earlier because I was on my work schedule, but after she told me how anxious she felt, I decided to drive out. I've been working night shifts for 2 years, and it's taking a toll. I've developed some mild insomnia, so I couldn't sleep when I arrived. After about 28 hours of being awake, I was a zombie. Even when I wanted to sleep, I couldn't. But I had no choice. We had a busy day ahead, taking her cousins to school, attending a gender reveal, and getting groceries. I managed to sleep for about 10 minutes in the car before going to work, but it wasn't enough. By the time I arrived at work, I was exhausted, but I grabbed a Red Bull and powered through. It was Wednesday night by the time my shift started. I'd been awake for more than 24 hours. My shift began like any other, working in the surgery rooms and stocking supplies. But as I was alone in one of the rooms, something odd happened. The door behind me opened, and I heard the familiar squeak of its hinges. When I turned around, there was no one there. Maybe they saw me and walked off, but I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, I entered another room to stock meds. The lights were off. I flipped the switch, and as the light flickered on, I saw something that made my heart stop. A man hunched over by the sharps bin, rummaging through it like he was looking for something. His face was pale, covered in blood, his body jerking violently. He looked like he was having a seizure. Blood was pouring from his eyes, nose, and mouth. The monitor above him was blaring, alerting that he was coding. I froze in place, then quickly stepped behind the doorframe. I was trying to figure out what to do when I realized there was no one else in the room. The man wasn't real. He was gone. There was no one in the room at all. It's one thing to be sleep-deprived and hallucinating, but that wasn't a hallucination. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I had just looked back into the room, and it was completely empty. The bed was neatly made, the monitor was powered off, and there was no sign that anyone had been there for at least a full day. The cold chill that crept down my spine made me think for a moment that maybe I was hallucinating. I quickly turned on my heel and headed back to the elevator, eager to get back to the first floor where the pharmacy was. As the elevator doors opened, an older man wearing a security uniform and a hospital badge stepped in. He lightly patted me on the shoulder as he passed by. It was the same man I had seen just moments before, having a seizure and making those strange, guttural noises. He flashed a smile at me as the doors slid shut, and I watched the elevator's numbers light up as it ascended to the 5th floor. I didn't press the button to bring the elevator back down, but to my surprise, the same elevator returned to the 1st floor a moment later. The doors opened. The elevator was completely empty. Feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise, I bolted out of the elevator and ran back to the pharmacy, where I stayed in a chair for the rest of my shift until my wife came to pick me up. As I sat there waiting, I Googled, when do hallucinations start from lack of sleep? It said they could begin between 30 and 48 hours of no rest. By that point, I had been awake for 38 hours, so it made sense. The pharmacy was located directly below the 54-55 wing of the hospital, and whenever I looked out the window, I could see the far end of the hospital building. I often found myself staring at the distant window, especially when waiting for the elevator to return. That night, as I was walking out to my wife's car, I looked up at that same window and froze. There, in the fifth-floor window, stood the same old man, staring right at me. My chest tightened, and a wave of unease washed over me. I quickly got into the car, but I didn't say anything about it to my wife. I still couldn't explain why I would hallucinate that specific man. I had never seen him before, and he had no significance in my life. I didn't know if what I saw that night was a hallucination or something else entirely, but it sure felt real. I collapsed into bed as soon as I got home and haven't seen the man again, but the memory still lingers. That was just under 2 weeks ago. It was a peaceful evening when I decided to stay at my boyfriend's house. It's a modest place, nothing extravagant compared to the other houses on the street, but that's part of the charm. It's a smaller home, but in this neighborhood, that means we still get to live in a desirable area without breaking the bank. The house is single-story, with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, plus a basement for extra space. Our block is quiet, and the street bends just right so that there's no direct view from the neighboring homes. The privacy here is remarkable. There are only 8 houses on our block, and just down the street, there's a small patch of woods that adds to the seclusion. My boyfriend, M, had gone away for the weekend to Vegas for a bachelor party last October, so I was alone from Thursday to Monday. On Friday, I invited a few of my friends over for a wine night. We ended up watching a few scary movies in the living room, the atmosphere tense but fun. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. Everyone paused, exchanging nervous glances. Late-night doorbells while watching a horror film. Not exactly the kind of coincidence you want to deal with. I tiptoed toward the front door and tried peeking through the tiny glass panel at the top, but there was no view of the porch. I could see the driveway from the window, 4 cars, so clearly someone knew we were home, but the porch was empty. I went back to the group, and while we all agreed it was strange, we chalked it up to some late-night prank. Ding-dong ditch, we laughed nervously. After my friends left, I went to bed, but less than an hour later, I was jolted awake by the doorbell ringing again. Twice. I checked the time. 1:00 a.m. This was not a normal time for anyone to be at your door. I called M immediately, and he picked up the phone, sounding half drunk at a bar. He told me to stay inside the bedroom and not open the door to anyone. He didn't suggest calling the police, though, so I refrained from doing so. We ended the call, and I tried to settle back into bed, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. I could feel my body tense as I heard something outside, a faint clicking noise, almost like nails tapping against the window. Then, a soft knock on the window. "Hey, anyone home?" came a male voice, chilling in its familiarity. I froze at the top of the basement stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The soft, rhythmic clicking continued from below, a sound that I couldn't place. I felt my breath hitch as I took a hesitant step forward, the cold draft in the house seeping into my bones. I looked down into the darkness, but the basement light was off, and the stairs leading down were barely visible. The clicking noise was steady, almost mechanical, as if something, or someone, was methodically tapping or knocking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too deliberate, too consistent to be normal. It wasn't the sound of a mouse or a creaking floorboard. It was far too precise. I stepped closer to the top of the stairs, straining to hear through the thick silence that enveloped the house. Was someone down there? Was it an animal? Or something worse? The sound continued. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. Nothing. I stood there for a moment, my pulse thundering in my ears, as I debated whether to go down and check. The house had always been cold and unsettling, especially at night, but this was different. I hadn't even heard anyone enter. I glanced around the room, my gaze lingering on the open window. I had definitely closed it earlier. The tapping from the basement continued, insistent and unnatural. It was as if whatever was down there was aware of my presence. The thought sent a chill through me, and I took a slow step back. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural voice. No words, just a rasping, heavy breath. I was too scared to move. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It was as if the air itself had grown thick with something malevolent. Then, as if on cue, the voice stopped, replaced by the unmistakable sound of dragging footsteps across the wooden floor. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from the hallway, just beyond the kitchen. I backed away from the stairs, turning toward the kitchen and clutching the banister, my breath shallow. My mind raced, trying to piece together a rational explanation. Was it a neighbor? Had I been hearing things? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The footsteps grew louder, dragging, almost stumbling, as if the person, or whatever it was struggling to move. I pressed my back against the wall, staring at the basement door, waiting for any sign of movement. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, like something heavy hitting the floor downstairs. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. Without thinking, I bolted from the stairs, running into the living room, hoping to find some safety. But then I heard it, a faint, eerie whistling from the kitchen. It was a tune, or what sounded like a tune, but it wasn't a song I recognized. It was the kind of eerie, off-key melody that sent chills crawling down your spine. I had no idea what was going on, but I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave, to get out, but there was no way I was going back downstairs. I was already too far gone, too terrified. My mind was racing with every possible scenario. A break-in, a prank, or worse, something far worse that couldn't be explained by logic. But just as I was about to reach for the door, I heard it again. A soft, whispering voice, this time right behind me. Don't go. My blood ran cold. I spun around to face the kitchen, heart hammering, but no one was there. The whistling had stopped. The house felt still, too still, as if time itself had stopped. I could hear my own breathing now, ragged and shallow. I backed toward the door, fingers trembling as I grabbed the handle. My mind raced. I had to get out. But before I could open it, the lights in the house flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply, a biting coldness that felt unnatural, like ice water running through my veins. And then, suddenly, the whistling resumed. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right in front of me, close enough that I could feel my skin prickle with fear. I wasn't alone in the house. Not anymore. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I reached the top of the stairs, my breath heavy in the silence, and looked down into the pitch-black basement. The unsettling clicking sound that had been echoing through the house abruptly stopped. A cold shiver ran down my spine as a voice, low and chilling, drifted up from below. You're finally home, it said. Without thinking, I slammed the basement door shut and grabbed my phone. I rushed outside, pounding on the neighbor's door until he answered. I didn't waste another second. I called the police from the safety of his home. Unfortunately, it was the same two officers who had already been to my house earlier. My neighbor decided to come with me when I went to speak to them, and I think his presence had some kind of effect on the taller cop's attitude. He wasn't as rude this time. They agreed to search the house again, and as I stood in the living room with my neighbor, they went through every room looking for anything suspicious. After their initial search, I showed them all the spots I thought someone might be hiding, and together, we basically turned the entire house upside down. All the while, I was on the phone with my boyfriend, who was drunk and out of town. When I was sure no one was hiding in the house anymore, I packed a bag and left to stay with my sister until Em came back. This time, I locked every window before leaving, every single one. The main lesson I took away from this experience: if you have windows that open wide enough for someone to crawl through, make sure they're locked when they're closed. We still live in this house, but for months after that, I refused to be alone for any extended period of time. I still have PTSD from that night. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear knocking at the window, and I wake up in a cold sweat. I've always enjoyed my late-night walks. There's something about the stillness of the night that clears the mind, makes everything feel simpler. I'm a welder by trade, been doing it for over 40 years now. I live alone on a farm, just me and my dog, Bosley. The house is too big for just one person, but after Maria passed, I never had the heart to downsize. My kids left years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and him. One evening, after a long day in the shop, I decided to take a walk. My property's pretty big, so one lap around usually does the trick. The air was cool, and Bosley trotted along at my side, his tail wagging as he walked in that lopsided way of his. Sometimes, I think he might like me more than I like him. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but tonight, as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looks out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a brief second, I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at that window. No one should have been in there. I hadn't stepped foot in that room since Maria died. I couldn't bring myself to. I felt my blood start to boil, anger flooding in. Someone had broken into my house. I wouldn't stand for it. I rushed inside, heart pounding, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, just as I'd left it. Nothing out of place. I looked around, but found nothing. My hands were shaking, but more out of frustration than fear. Maybe I had just imagined it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, had been in there. The next night, I woke up to Bosley growling low in his throat. He's a good dog, never barks unless there's a reason. I sat up, listening hard. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable creak of wood upstairs. Could have been the house settling, but my mind went straight to footsteps, and those footsteps, they were coming from right above me. I'm sure you can guess which room is directly above mine. I debated grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs, but didn't want to go that far yet. If it came down to it, though, I was confident I could take whatever was up there hand to hand. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. Nothing. The room was exactly as I'd left it, untouched. But my anger had started turning into something else. Anxiety. Something wasn't right in this house anymore. The following night, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights on. I know I turned them off before bed. I don't leave lights on. There was no question about it anymore. Someone was in my house. I started to panic. I called the police, told them I thought someone was sneaking around. They came out and searched the house, top to bottom, but found nothing. They were polite about it, told me to call if I needed them again, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The next night was the worst by far. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go upstairs and check the bedroom again. I don't know why. I thought maybe seeing it again would calm my mind. But when I opened the door, I froze. Clothes were scattered all over the floor. Maria's clothes. Clothes I had packed away after she died. Now they were everywhere. That doesn't just happen. And then I saw her. There was a woman standing in the doorway, just staring at me. I couldn't make out her face clearly, but I could tell she wasn't Maria. She was too short. I didn't know who she was, but I knew she didn't belong there. I've never been so terrified in my life. Without thinking, I ran at her, but she turned and bolted down the stairs, out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. I searched the whole property with Bosley, but there was no trace of her. I didn't sleep that night or for months after that. I was on edge all the time, convinced I could hear footsteps above me at night. Every little sound set me off. I slept with my rifle next to my bed, terrified I'd have to use it. One night, every little sound, every creak in the floor, felt like a warning. I debated calling my brother to come stay with me, but I wasn't about to do that. I was raised to handle things myself, so I did. But the nightmare didn't end. One night, I was sitting in the living room when I noticed a figure standing in the yard, watching me through the window. It was her again. My heart stopped. I grabbed my rifle and ran outside, Bosley close behind me. She was still standing there, just a silhouette in the moonlight, staring at me. I fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare her off. It worked, for the moment. She turned and ran into the darkness. But even that didn't make me feel any better. I was being tormented by some woman I didn't know. She was probably homeless, but why was this happening to me? I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if she'd come back. She never did. I haven't seen her since, but I know it's only a matter of time. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but living with this constant anxiety, I don't know how much longer I can handle it. Thank God for Bosley. I have no idea what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything happens. I work for a catering company, so I'm on the road constantly, mostly late at night. My days are spent hauling boxes and equipment around in this massive truck the company insists I drive. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours are brutal, and it's not at all what I expected to be doing at this stage of my life. By the time I get home, I'm either so jittery from too much caffeine that I can't sleep, or I pass out the second my head hits the pillow and sleep straight through the next 12 hours. One night, I was driving home around 2 a.m. after a particularly long shift. It was nice to be back in my own car again. As I approached my house, I realized I'd probably had one too many Red Bulls. There was no way I'd be able to sleep tonight. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours and I was starving. There's a McDonald's just off the highway about 10 minutes from my place. It's usually my go-to for late-night snacks, mostly because it's so convenient. I'm not a fast food junkie, but sometimes I get this weird craving for a handful of fries, and that's exactly what I needed. I knew it was open 24/7, so I figured I'd grab some comfort food to help wind down. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I do know it was definitely past 2 a.m. by the time I pulled into the drive-thru. There were a few cars ahead of me, which honestly surprised me. It's not like this McDonald's was a busy spot at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. While I was sitting there, impatiently waiting, I found myself zoning out, wondering what was taking so long. That's when I noticed something strange. There, at the far end of the parking lot, was an old, beat-up Volkswagen with tinted windows, backed into a spot in the corner. Now the McDonald's was only taking drive-through orders at this hour, so it didn't make sense for someone to park like that. There were employee spots across the lot, so it couldn't have been one of them. I assumed it was just someone eating in their car, which wasn't too odd. I'd done the same thing plenty of times, but still, it felt weird. I got my food and started driving away, not ready to go home yet, but also not wanting to sit idly in the parking lot. I needed somewhere quiet to eat, so I started thinking of a good place. I live in a pretty wooded area, so there are plenty of options, but considering how late it was, I didn't want to drive too far. There's a large nature preserve just down the street from my place, located on a mountain. It's basically just a huge forest, but at the peak there's a lookout point with a stunning view of the city. During the day, there's a road that loops around the preserve, taking you right to the peak. After hours, though, the road is closed to cars. It's still a good path to hike up without trudging through the woods. I used to go there with friends from high school all the time. It was our go-to spot when we wanted to be outside, hang out, or just enjoy the view. I hadn't been in a while, though. Work had consumed all my time, so I figured a visit might help me shake off the stress and bring back some nostalgia. When I pulled into the parking area, I was surprised to see it was completely empty. The parking area isn't a proper lot, but more like a gravel patch that veers off the main road. The preserve was closed, so I would have to walk up to the lookout point from the outside, but that didn't bother me. What bothered me was the headlights pulling into the lot just as I was about to turn off my engine. I glanced over, and that's when I saw it, the same Volkswagen from the McDonald's parking lot. I was 100% sure of it. I parked a little further away and killed the engine. A creeping unease washed over me. What were the odds? Had they followed me? My window was partially rolled down, but there was no sound coming from their car. No music, no voices, just silence. I waited, trying to shake off the feeling, but after a minute or so, I started to relax. Maybe they were just here for some fresh air, like I was. Still, the timing felt off, and my instincts wouldn't let me ignore the weirdness of the whole situation. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed Sebastian, a close friend who lived nearby. I figured if he didn't answer, I'd just eat my food in the car and head home. But to my surprise, he picked up right away. He was awake, working on a paper. I convinced him to meet me at the preserve, and he said he'd be there in 10 minutes. As I waited, I kept an eye on the Volkswagen. It still hadn't moved. I tried to dismiss my worries, telling myself I was just being paranoid. When Sebastian finally showed up, I felt a lot better. We both got out of our cars and started walking up the path toward the peak. Just before the parking lot disappeared from view, I glanced back. There, by the car, were 4 guys standing together, doing nothing but staring at each other. They weren't talking or laughing, just silently looking around. It was unsettling. I nudged Sebastian and pointed. He followed my gaze and, like me, started to feel uneasy. The guys didn't notice us, so we kept walking, turning the corner so the parking lot was out of sight. My mind was racing. Something wasn't right. By the time we reached the top, the city view didn't do much to calm my nerves. We sat on a rock wall like we used to, eating and talking, but the good vibes didn't last long. From the path below, we heard voices. Laughter. 3 guys were walking toward us, sharing a blunt. They acted friendly enough, which helped ease some of the tension, but instead of finding their own spot, they walked right up to us like they wanted to start a conversation. The guy holding the blunt looked intimidating, covered in tattoos and with a nose ring. He flashed a half smile and asked if we wanted to smoke. We both said no, and one of the others laughed and called us boring. Sebastian scoffed, but my curiosity got the best of me. I asked them what they were doing at McDonald's so late. The guy with the blunt stopped smiling immediately. His expression hardened, and his 2 friends mirrored him. They didn't say a word for what felt like an eternity. Then I realized something. There had been 4 guys in that car, not 3. One of them was missing. My blood ran cold. Sebastian must have noticed the same thing, because we both stood up at the same time. Finally, the ringleader spoke. He said he worked nights and had just gotten off. To prove it, he pulled his hoodie up to reveal a McDonald's uniform. He went on to explain that they came here every night after work to smoke and hang out, but something about the whole situation still didn't sit right with me. I could tell it didn't sit right with Sebastian either. We decided it was time to leave. As we started walking down the path, Sebastian stopped and pointed into the trees. I turned to look and saw the 4th guy, half hidden in the darkness, holding something. I couldn't make out what it was, but when he saw us looking, he started moving toward us. That's when we ran. We bolted down the path, not daring to look back. Their footsteps echoed behind us, getting closer. My heart felt like it was going to burst, but I didn't dare slow down. We made it to the parking lot and jumped into our cars, flooring it out of there. As I sped away, I saw the guys rushing to get in their Volkswagen. I didn't feel safe going home, in case they decided to follow me. I called Sebastian and suggested we meet up on his street instead. We had a good head start, but I wasn't taking any chances. When we finally met up, we were both in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Neither of us knew if they were trying to rob us or worse. It didn't make sense. Sebastian showed me his phone. He had taken a picture of them while they weren't looking. He sent it to me, but honestly, I didn't know what to do with it. The next day, I had the day off, so I convinced Sebastian to come with me to report what had happened at the McDonald's. We talked to one of the younger employees and showed him the picture. His face went pale. Apparently, one of the guys in the photo had worked at that very McDonald's. His girlfriend had recently dumped him, and he hadn't taken it well. He'd been harassing her at work and stalking her after hours. He'd been fired, but that didn't stop him. The police had gotten involved, and a restraining order was issued. And now he was still violating that order. He'd been camping out in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. It was clear that the guy was unhinged, and I still have no idea why he followed me that night. I'm just hoping the police catch him before he does anything worse. I haven't been back to that McDonald's or the preserve since. It's been a week now, and I'm praying the guy doesn't recognize my car. I grew up in a small town in rural Michigan, where the most exciting thing to do was watch trees sway and listen to the hum of the wind. If you liked long stretches of solitude, this was the place for you. But as soon as I got my car and saved up a bit, I bolted. I'm not a hater of nature, but if I had to choose, I'd pick the city any day of the week. My parents sold that property 5 years ago, but it was a 3-acre lot with a large farmhouse and a storage shed out back. I was 13 when the strange events started. My parents often left me alone on the weekends. I was responsible and had chores to handle around the property. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the living room playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City on my 2 pounds when I heard a loud metallic bang from outside, coming from somewhere in the yard. I bolted up, rushing to every window, scanning the yard. Nothing. Until I reached the window that looked out on the storage shed. The door to the shed was wide open. I grabbed the rifle from the closet, deciding to go outside. I shouted out, "Who's out there?" But no response. As I approached the shed, I shouted again, announcing that I had a gun, my heart racing in my chest. I was used to being alone, but this felt wrong. Inside, there were plenty of places someone could hide, behind the lawn mower, the four-wheeler, the bags of fertilizer. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but my instincts told me to leave. I slammed the door shut behind me and ran back inside, locking every door and watching the shed from the window. That door was heavy. It didn't open on its own. It couldn't. Someone had to have come through, and they were either still in the shed or lurking somewhere close. I picked up the phone and dialed my dad's number. No answer. So I left a voicemail. I tried to focus on the TV but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when I heard it, a creaking sound from upstairs. My heart skipped. Was I imagining things, or was someone really in the house? I had always been protective of that place, even if I didn't like it. It was my home, my family's home, and I had to look out for it. With the rifle in hand, I crept upstairs. There were 5 doors at the top of the stairs, 4 leading to bedrooms, 1 to the bathroom. I knelt down and looked under the crack of my parents' bedroom door. What I saw nearly made my heart stop. 2 bare feet, facing the opposite wall. My stomach twisted in knots. The fear hit me like a freight train. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't ready to fight anyone, let alone hurt them. I quickly ran downstairs and locked myself in the bathroom, dialing 911. I whispered my situation into the phone, telling them everything. The dispatcher told me to stay put and remain silent. I could hear footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, moving toward the bathroom. Then right outside the door, I heard a voice, a low, guttural voice. "What's up, kid?" I froze. The voice was chilling. If I heard it again today, I would know it in an instant. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My entire body trembled with fear. I broke the silence. I'm on the phone with the cops. I have a gun. I put the dispatcher on speaker, her voice asking if everything was okay. The man tried to open the door, but when he found it locked, he simply stopped. I heard him walk away, and then the sound of a door slamming shut. The back door. I let out a sigh of relief, but stayed in the bathroom, waiting for the police. When they arrived, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. After a thorough search of the house, confirming the man was gone, the officer suggested I stay elsewhere for the night. I called my uncle, and he came to take me to his house. What haunts me the most about that day is that it was my fault. I left the door unlocked when I went out to investigate. That's when the man must have slipped in. Even with a rifle in my hand, I didn't feel safe at all. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. It was 5 years later when I was 18, and my parents went away for their anniversary trip. By that point, my sister had moved out, and I was left alone to look after the property. The place was isolated, surrounded by thick woods and a long, dirt driveway that led to a quiet back road. In this small town, everyone knew each other, but it was rare to meet a stranger. It was a peaceful life until things started to change. One afternoon, I was at the local gas station, filling up when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the pump next to mine. A man with a scruffy goatee stepped out and greeted me, making small talk as he filled his tank. He was friendly enough, and in a town where everyone knew everyone, it wasn't odd for a stranger to chat you up. "Do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" he asked. I gave him the directions the best I could. Instead of using his phone like most people, he pulled out a notepad and started writing them down. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it. He asked where I was from, and I told him I grew up in the area. He didn't tell me where he was from, but said he was just passing through. After a few more exchanges, he asked for my name. I told him Kate. "That's a lovely name," he said, and got back in his car. I drove off, headed back toward the property. It was a few minutes before I turned into the driveway when I noticed that same black Jeep behind me. He passed me as I turned, heading the opposite direction of the interstate. He didn't slow down, almost as if he was in a hurry or had forgotten the directions I gave him. I brushed it off as nothing, but when I got inside the house, the unease started creeping in. Later that night, when I went to meet up with my friends, I stepped outside and heard footsteps behind me. I told myself it was probably an animal in the woods, but when I returned, hours later, and was walking toward the front door, I froze. From somewhere deep in the woods, I heard the voice, "Kate." Chills ran down my spine. The neighbors knew my name, but there was no reason for anyone to be out in the woods calling me like that, in that creepy, unnerving tone. I rushed inside, locked the door, and called my parents. They reassured me it was probably just one of the neighbors, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The next day, it happened again. I was heading to my car to meet friends, when once more, from the distance, I heard, "Kate." This time, I didn't hesitate. I bolted back inside and locked the door. I called 911. When the officers arrived, they looked around the property with flashlights but found nothing. They told me to call again if it happened again, but I didn't feel much safer. The next few days, I stayed inside, paranoid. One evening, after a long shift at the restaurant, I returned home just as the sun was setting. The moment I parked my car and stepped out, I heard it again, the same voice. "Kate, don't call the cops on me again, cutie." I bolted inside and called 911 once more. The police came and checked the perimeter again. They didn't find anything, but I didn't feel safe. My parents suggested I stay with a friend, and I agreed. My friend Alex came to pick me up, and I quickly packed a bag. I checked all the windows first, making sure no one was lurking around. As soon as I was outside and locking the door behind me, I heard a noise, a soft scuffling sound just outside the car. I looked to my left and froze. A man, wearing a face mask, was trying to open the driver's side door. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream. I just slammed the key into the ignition and sped down the driveway. I didn't stop until I was at Alex's house, hysterically crying. She and her father called the police again. They went to my parents' place, searched the house again, but there was no sign of forced entry. When my parents returned the next day, I felt safe again. But the experience was enough to make me realize something terrifying. The man I had met at the gas station had been watching me. He had followed me home, likely scoping the place out. My name, my location, everything. It was my fault. I gave him too much information. I was too trusting. That fear, that dread, has stuck with me ever since. Later, something happened that made me revisit this experience. My friend Cody asked me to dog sit for him. His Pomsky Theo was a loud barker, so when Theo started barking his head off at something outside, I didn't think much of it at first. Just another false alarm, right? But then Theo ran to the back door and started barking more urgently. At that point, I figured he just wanted to go outside. But when I got close to the door, I realized something strange. Someone was trying to open it from the outside. I glanced through the screen door and saw a man standing in the backyard. He wasn't someone I recognized. He was probably in his mid-50s, dirty, and smelled like he hadn't bathed in weeks. He didn't look like he belonged there. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaky. He leaned closer to the door, squinting. "Have you seen Melissa?" Melissa was Cody's younger sister, in her 20s. This man, though, he looked filthy, like he'd been living on the streets for years. I told him he needed to leave. "There's no Melissa here." The man hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I said firmly. "You need to leave. There are cameras all over the property." At that, he turned and left. I stood there watching until I couldn't see him anymore. Later, I asked Cody if he knew who that man could have been. Cody's sister, Melissa, had never met him. He looked like someone who had no business being there, especially at the back door. It didn't sit right with me. What was this man really trying to do? What if he'd had darker intentions? It's terrifying how easily things could have turned ugly. That's why we should always keep our doors locked. My name's Chuck. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, back in 2016. My time at college was everything I'd hoped for, part of a fraternity, balancing my studies just right, and spending a decent amount of time chasing after girls. In fact, I'm still close with a lot of my old fraternity brothers. I even got engaged to Rosie, the girl I met back at Berkeley. But if you had asked me about my college experience when I was a freshman, my answer would have been very different. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I never got too caught up in the whole overachiever mindset in high school. Berkeley's atmosphere was strange to me, and I struggled with the pressure to always be planning ahead, mapping out the next 30 years of my life when I was barely 18. It was ridiculous, really, but that was the vibe of Berkeley at the time. If you wanted a shot at getting into the business world, you had to have the perfect LinkedIn profile, the kind of profile that made you seem like you were already on your way to the top. I spent hours tweaking mine, stressing over the smallest details, who to connect with, what skills to list, as if my entire future depended on it. But it paid off. Out of nowhere, I got an email that stopped me dead in my tracks. A prestigious firm had reached out to me, a real message, not one of those generic spam things you get on LinkedIn. They expressed interest in my profile and invited me to interview. I couldn't believe it. I spent the next few days doing nothing but research, getting ready for the interview, preparing for questions, looking into the company's history, culture, you name it. Then I got an email from a guy named Armin Slowinski. I'll never forget his name. Curious, I immediately Googled him, expecting to find all kinds of professional details, maybe a LinkedIn profile, but nothing. Not even a trace of the guy online. That struck me as odd, but I didn't think too much of it. Maybe he just liked his privacy or whatever. The day of the interview came, and he sent me the location. A coffee shop in Oakland. Now that confused me. Berkeley had dozens of perfect spots for an interview. Why Oakland? Still, I brushed it off and plugged the address into my phone. I was a little nervous, but I didn't think too much about it. I told my buddy Riley about the weirdness, and he was just as thrown off as I was. He thought it seemed off, but he also knew how much I wanted this position. So he offered to drive me. I gladly accepted, partly because I didn't want to show up looking like I couldn't even get to my own interview. That day at 4 p.m., Riley picked me up from my dorm. He was joking around as usual, but I was already starting to feel the nerves kicking in. We hit the road, and about 20 minutes later, I told Riley to drop me off a little ways from the coffee shop. I didn't want to look unprofessional showing up with a friend. He offered to wait, but I waved him off. I thanked him, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the location. And then I froze. The place I was supposed to be going, it wasn't there. The so-called coffee shop was just a huge construction site. I couldn't believe my eyes. This whole block had clearly been torn down recently. Google Maps hadn't even updated yet. There wasn't a coffee shop in sight, only crumbling buildings and rubble. I was just about to call Riley when a voice boomed behind me. "Chuck." I spun around to see a ridiculously tall man in an expensive-looking black suit. He stood beside a matte black Bentley, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief wash over me. This must have been my interviewer, right? He didn't look like the type of guy who'd pull some weird prank. "Oh, hey. Sorry, I didn't expect this either," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Why don't we find somewhere else?" Without waiting for an answer, he motioned toward the car. "Get in," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Confused but intrigued, I climbed into the back of the Bentley. As I walked around to the other side, I glanced inside the back seat. I half expected to see something luxurious, but instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. There, lying on the floor, was a man. His body was stiff and unnatural, and in his hand, he gripped something long and metal. My heart skipped a beat. Panic surged through me. My gut was screaming that this was some kind of trap. I turned on my heel and sprinted away from the car without looking back. Behind me, I heard the man call my name, but I didn't stop. Then came the screech of tires. I shot a glance over my shoulder. The Bentley was pulling around to chase me. My mind raced. There was no way I could outrun a car. The streets ahead were an endless maze of buildings, but I couldn't stop now. I made a snap decision at the next intersection. Left? Right? My feet chose before my brain could catch up. I ran down the right street, hoping for some kind of miracle. And then, I saw it. A fire escape on one of the buildings ahead. It was low enough that I could reach it. I bolted toward it, using every ounce of energy to leap up and grab the ladder. I'd never done a pull-up in my life, but this wasn't just some stupid climb. It was life or death. I hauled myself up, hands shaking. When I finally made it to the top, I heard the Bentley screech around the corner. It stopped right below me. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I knew he was looking up. The next few seconds stretched into an eternity. The car didn't follow. Instead, it sped off, turning left and disappearing into the distance. I collapsed against the fire escape, barely able to breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Riley, practically screaming into the phone about what just happened. He found me and drove me back to my dorm. The whole ride was silent, neither of us knowing what to say. Afterward, I tried to forget about it. I buried it deep in my mind, never mentioning it again, especially to Riley. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I remember everything. The fear, the cold dread. What could have happened if I hadn't run? I can't help but wonder if I was just one wrong decision away from never coming back. It was just a few months ago when my family and I were driving to college to help me move in. I was a first-year student, excited but nervous about the next chapter of my life. When we arrived, I found out I'd be living in a shared suite with a Jack and Jill bathroom, meaning I'd be living with 3 other guys. I knew one of them from orientation, and his roommate didn't really matter for this story. It's my roommate, Dora, that I need to talk about. Before moving in, I had exchanged social media information with him, and I tried reaching out over Instagram to get to know him better. But his replies were always short, and his profile gave off this odd, detached vibe, like one of those people you see in memes about Discord mods or creepy TikTok personalities. When I finally met him in person, it wasn't a surprise. He fit the stereotype to a T. Dora, had a thin frame, about my height, and looked like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His skin was pale, and he sported a peach fuzz mustache. I tried to make small talk, but he stuttered through his sentences and seemed eager to end every conversation as quickly as possible. He didn't even seem to care about music. He told me it wouldn't fill the void in his life. Then came the really weird part. When he set up his 5 pounds, he didn't just play. He became the game. I'd be sitting on my bed, trying to focus on something else, and then I'd hear these strange, guttural noises coming from him. He'd violently shake his body, laugh maniacally, and slap the controller like it was some kind of lifeline. Occasionally, he pulled his feet up into his lap, gripping them as he rocked back and forth, whispering things under his breath, always repeating them twice in a low, disturbing tone. Diora stayed in that room almost 24/7. He didn't do his homework or leave to hang out with anyone. His whole existence seemed to revolve around those strange, disturbing gaming sessions. I could barely get any sleep, but it was only the beginning. About a week into the semester, I went out with some friends from the dorm and got back around 1:00 a.m. When I walked in, I saw Diora lying in bed with his back to me. I figured he was asleep, but when I grabbed my phone charger from my desk, I felt a strange chill down my spine. I turned around to find Diora staring at me, wide-eyed with a faint grin on his face. I jumped back in shock. "Diora, why the hell are you staring at me like that?" I blurted out. He just laughed, a low, unsettling chuckle, and muttered something about it being dark time. He then turned his back to me and faced the wall. I tried to brush it off, but this happened 2 or 3 more times in the following weeks. Every time I came back late, Diora would be awake, staring at me, smiling in that eerie way. I even tried to switch rooms, but my college said there were no available dorms. My only option was to tough it out and stay with Diora for the semester. I had no choice. Months passed, and things got worse. One day, I came back from an English class that had run late. When I opened the door, Diora was standing up in a panic. He was acting off. He asked why I was back so early, which didn't make sense because I had explained my class schedule. I asked if he needed the room to himself, but he acted like it was no big deal, striking some weird pose that looked like something out of an anime. He muttered, "Don't worry about it," with a strange smile. Then I noticed something even stranger. There was a box on his desk. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I asked about it, he brushed it off. That's when I realized my iPhone charger and a pair of scissors were missing from my side of the room. I asked Diora if he'd seen them, and he handed them back with a little too much hesitation. But when he passed me the charger, his box tipped over. Something fell out. A sticky note with my name on it. I picked it up and nearly lost it. There, underneath it, was a transparent case with my eyelashes, a pair of glasses, some of my socks, and a photo of me, one I'd taken as a joke for my Instagram. I froze. Diora quickly snatched everything up and tried to explain, but it was too late. I told him to leave. He didn't even argue. He just walked out. I immediately texted my resident assistant, RA, explaining everything. He said he wasn't around but to keep the box and show it to him when he returned the next day. I was so shaken up I stuffed the box into my laundry bin and tried to calm myself down. I still couldn't believe it. An hour later, Diora came back. I told him to stay on his side of the room and not to speak to me. But when I checked my laundry bin, the box was gone. My heart dropped. I called my RA and he came over to investigate, but without the box, there was nothing he could do. All I had was my word, and that wasn't enough. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The RA left, and a few hours later, Diora returned. I confronted him about the box, but he played dumb. He denied ever touching it, let alone knowing where it was. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done. It's now the second semester, and yes, I'm still stuck rooming with Diora. He promised it would never happen again. He swore he'd move out if he did anything like that again, but I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. I try to stay out of the room as much as possible, but I can't sleep. I can't focus. Every time I try to relax, my mind goes back to that box. What did he want with my photo? Why did he have my socks? The worst part? The eyelashes. And what disturbs me the most? The sticky note had my name on it, but it was written in a way I'd never seen before. I'm terrified that one day I'll come back and find something even worse. This happened to me during my freshman year of college, back in 2019. I've graduated now, but every Halloween week, I can't help but think back to that night. I went to a big school in the Midwest, and Halloween was always a wild time. It was a week full of crazy parties, especially fraternity ones. The bars got in on it too, everyone dressed up, and the whole town seemed to be on a perpetual sugar high from booze and adrenaline. There were a lot of crazy moments, but what happened to me that year was something I'll never forget. It all went down on that Saturday of Halloween week. Our football team had just scored a massive win, and my friends and I were heading to this off-campus frat house to celebrate. We knew about the party because one of my friends, Alexandro, was dating a guy on the team, so we had the inside scoop. We got to the frat party around 11 p.m. By that point, everyone was well into the night, throwing back drinks, chanting, and just getting loud and rowdy. The music was blaring, and people were already spilling out into the yard. I was having a blast, taking shots, dancing, and just soaking in the chaos. Here's a detail that's critical. My phone died around this time. I gave it to Alexandro to put in her purse, figuring I'd charge it later. I didn't think much of it at the time. At some point, I told my friends I was going to the bathroom, and they agreed to wait for me by the DJ booth. We were all pretty hammered by then, so I didn't think anything of it. But as I walked through the frat house and into the bathroom, I heard someone yell, "Cops." The entire house erupted into a frenzy. People started scrambling, pushing past each other, trying to get out. I sprinted out of the frat house, only to be met by flashing lights and cop cars everywhere. People were running in every direction, and the cops were trying to catch anyone underage. In my drunken state, I realized I didn't have my phone. I started yelling for my friends, hoping to spot them in the crowd. But the chaos was overwhelming. I realized I wasn't going to find them, so I decided to just make my way home. The frat house was far off campus, and I had no real clue how to get back. But I figured I'd just head in the general direction, and hopefully I'd run into something familiar. It was freezing cold that night, even though it was only October, about 37 degrees. I was still buzzed, but I was conscious enough to feel the cold creeping through me. After a while, I saw a building up ahead that looked like one of the academic buildings I'd heard about. I figured I could at least duck inside, warm up, and sober up a bit. I approached the door, twisted the handle, and stepped inside. It was dark in there, with only a few exit signs casting a dim light across the room. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few minutes of standing there, I realized something was off. This wasn't an academic building. It was some kind of warehouse. I felt warmer, but I was starting to get nervous. The place had an eerie, unsettling vibe. The air felt thick, and the silence was just too much. I turned to leave, but the door I had come through was locked. I tried pulling the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. I was stuck. That's when I started to panic. I moved toward another door that was marked with an exit sign, pushing it open in a hurry. But to my shock, it led to another part of the building. This room was smaller, lit only by a low red glow. There was a buzzing noise in the background, like an old machine running somewhere, and I saw chains hanging from the ceiling. Steam filled the air, making everything look like a scene from a horror movie. I turned to go back, but the door I'd come through was locked now too. Panic hit me like a brick, and I slid down the wall, quietly crying, trying not to break down. That's when I heard it. The sound of a door slamming shut. Footsteps. I froze. Another door slammed, followed by more heavy footsteps. Whoever was in the building wasn't alone, and they were getting closer. My heart was racing as I tried to stay as quiet as possible. I glanced around, my mind spinning. I saw another door to my left, and without thinking, I opened it slowly. I snuck into the next room, trying to stay hidden behind the hanging chains. I could hear the footsteps approaching. These weren't normal steps. They were heavy, deliberate, like someone in boots. My pulse skyrocketed. Then it hit me. I had to escape, or I might not make it out of here. I spotted a window nearby, and with all my strength, I kicked it. Once, twice, 3 times. The glass shattered. I didn't even have a second to think. I heard the footsteps pounding closer. I had maybe 10 seconds to make my move. I leaped through the window without hesitation. The fall wasn't far, maybe 10 feet, but I didn't realize I was landing on top of 2 recycling bins. The impact was hard, but I pushed myself off the ground, breathless and in shock. I glanced back up at the window. It was still shattered, but there was no one in the frame. I didn't waste any time. I ran, not even looking back. I darted under a few pine trees, hiding myself in the shadows. When I finally dared to look up, I saw someone standing at the window. They were looking out, scanning the area in every direction for me. I thought I was going to pass out from fear, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I stayed hidden as quiet as I could manage. Finally, I made my move. I dashed across the street and ran full speed. I didn't stop until I recognized the familiar side of campus, my dorm. When I got back, my friends were outside, looking panicked. They told me I'd been gone for almost 4 hours. I didn't have the energy to explain everything, but I told them what had happened. They were stunned, mouths agape. The next day, I did some digging. Turns out, the building I'd been in hadn't been used in years. It was abandoned. I never found out who or what was after me that night, but it wasn't any of the campus staff. It wasn't a cop. Whoever it was, they were not supposed to be there. I still get chills thinking about it. If I hadn't been quiet, if I hadn't thought fast, I don't think I'd be here telling you this story. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. When I first moved into this house, I already knew a little about its history. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had spent their final years here. They both passed away, and I now live in what was once their master bedroom. From the very beginning, I've had a strange connection to this space. I often see the old woman who used to live here. She doesn't frighten me. If anything, she seems kind. She tries to talk to me, but for some reason, we can't seem to communicate. I've never seen her husband, though. I have this feeling that he's at peace, resting in heaven, while she's still here, watching over the home they shared. I often catch glimpses of her reflection in the shadows of my TV screen at night. Sometimes she waves to me, a small, gentle gesture that feels more comforting than eerie. After I redecorated the bedroom, I didn't see her as much, and I suspect she moved downstairs to the living room. No one in the house can walk into that room between 3 and 4 a.m. Something about that hour feels heavy, as if the air itself changes. I've been told that this is the time when spirits are most active. I'm not sure how true that is, but I've certainly felt it. Recently, something happened that has made these experiences even more intense. Yesterday, my boyfriend passed away. It was sudden, and I'm still trying to process it. Last night, I dreamed about him. It felt so real, as if he was trying to tell me the things he didn't get the chance to say while he was alive. In the dream, he said goodbye and told me he loved me. I love you. Those were the last words he ever said to me over the phone. It's a small comfort now, knowing that's how we ended our last conversation, but it still hurts. Today, as I sit here in my room, I can feel him with me. I know he's here, even though I can't see him. It's the little things. Sometimes, I feel a hand resting over mine as I use my computer mouse. Other times, I feel my hair being gently played with, the way he used to when we were together. Things in my room have started moving on their own, not randomly, but only the objects that remind me of him. Drawings, little keepsakes, things we shared together. It's as though he's trying to let me know he's still here, still watching over me. I wish I could talk to him just one more time. There's so much I want to say. I want to tell him how much I loved him, how much he meant to me, and how sorry I am if I ever fell short. I wasn't perfect, but I hope he knows how much I cared. Right now, it feels like I have two spirits in my room, the old woman who waves from the shadows and him, the one I loved. At night, I sometimes feel as though he's sharing the bed with me, just like he did in life. I know this might sound strange coming from me. I'm only 15, but it's real. If you've ever experienced something similar, or if you have advice or thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey to a place called Gun Alley. It's a name that carries a lot of weight in the Northern Territory, home to one of the most well-known figures in the area. He ran a thriving business there, Gun Alley Gold Mining. It was the kind of place that became a local legend, a symbol of hard work and prosperity. But everything changed when he passed away. Since his death, his wife has claimed she can still feel his presence in the house, lingering in the business they'd built together. At first, I didn't believe her. I thought it was just grief playing tricks on her mind. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to see for myself. The house was like something straight out of a horror movie, an old rickety structure at the end of a dusty dirt track. Outside there were gold panning troughs, a stand of axes and saws, and a few lemon trees swaying gently in the breeze. It felt frozen in time, as though it had been left untouched since the height of its glory days. I pushed open the creaky front door, the sound echoing through the quiet house, and was greeted by his wife. She smiled knowingly and said, "I'm heading down to the shops to pick up a few groceries. I'll bet you'll be running out of here in, 5 minutes." She laughed, but there was something about her tone, half joking, half serious, that sent a small shiver down my spine. I shrugged it off, laughed along, and stepped inside. After she left, I made myself comfortable in the lounge room, turning on the TV. A few minutes passed uneventfully, and I started to relax. But then my stomach grumbled, and I decided to head to the kitchen for something to eat. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the faint sunlight filtering through the windows. It wasn't completely dark, but the shadows made the room feel heavy, almost alive. I opened the fridge and reached for a loaf of bread when I felt it, something or someone, brushing their hands against my back. Startled, I jerked upright, banging my head on the fridge door. I spun around, but no one was there. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. "Is anyone here?" The silence that followed was deafening. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination, and went back to fixing a quick snack. When I returned to the lounge room, my heart sank. Everything had been rearranged. The chairs weren't where they had been before, and the TV was now tuned to a different channel. I stared at the room in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. For a moment, I thought I might have misremembered how things were set up, but deep down, I knew better. Something was off. I sat back down, determined to shake off the unease, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Loud, deliberate footsteps coming closer. My pulse quickened as I jumped to my feet, but before I could do anything, the chair I had been sitting on lifted into the air. I froze, watching in disbelief as it floated several feet off the ground before suddenly dropping back down with a loud thud. That was it. My fear took over, and I bolted for the door. But when I reached it, the knob wouldn't turn. I tried every door in the house, but they were all locked. Desperately, I ran to the windows, but they wouldn't budge either. Panic set in, and I grabbed a nearby object, a vase, maybe, I don't even remember, and smashed one of the windows. The glass shattered, and I scrambled through, cutting myself on the shards in my rush to escape. As I stumbled outside, gasping for air, I looked back at the house. It stood there, silent and unassuming, as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. What I experienced inside was something I'd never forget. To this day, I can't explain what happened in Gun Alley. Maybe his wife was right. Maybe his spirit is still there, tied to the life he built. Or maybe something else lingers in that house, something older and darker. Either way, I won't be going back. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've had an experience like this, or if you have any theories about what I encountered, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories like this. It's a chilling tale of strange occurrences, whispers in the dark, and the question we all fear: can something follow you even when you move? For as long as Brian can remember, strange things have happened in the house he grew up in. He lived there for 19 years, and over that time, he became almost accustomed to the unusual. Lights would flicker on and off without reason. Radios would tune themselves to different stations. But the truly strange part, most of it only seemed to happen to him. When he turned 21, Brian decided to move out of his parents' house and into a place of his own. But before we get there, let's rewind to the night when something happened that changed how he saw his childhood home forever. It started like so many other nights, just going to bed and drifting off. His room was in the middle of some redecorating. He'd just laid new wooden floors and was sleeping on a mattress on the ground. In the corner of the room, a pile of old floorboards sat waiting to be disposed of. He turned off the light, trying to settle in for the night, when he heard it, the sound of wood being dragged across the floor. It was faint at first, but then unmistakable, like someone pushing the loose planks around. When he opened his eyes, he froze. Standing over him was a man dressed entirely in black. He couldn't make out the face. It was shrouded in shadow, but the figure loomed unmoving, staring straight down at him. Fear paralyzed him, and all he could do was lie there, heart pounding in the silence. Eventually, the figure disappeared, and he was left in the darkness, unsure if it had been real or just some kind of waking nightmare. His mom had a friend with a sixth sense, someone who claimed to be able to see spirits. She confirmed what Brian feared, that she too had seen the man, as well as two women, in the house on separate occasions. Whatever was in that house wasn't just in his imagination. 3 weeks ago, Brian finally moved out, ready to start a new chapter of his life. He found a place with a friend, just a 5-minute walk from his parents' house. At first, it seemed perfect. That first night, they settled in with a few drinks, laughing and relaxing, as you'd expect. But the peace didn't last long. Within a few days, strange noises began to echo through the house. At first, Brian and his roommate brushed it off as sounds coming from next door. But the more it happened, the harder it was to ignore. Footsteps upstairs, presses slamming shut, doors creaking open and closed. His roommate, a skeptic who had always laughed at Brian's stories, started to grow uneasy. On Wednesday night, things escalated. Brian was lying in bed, just about to drift off, when he heard the front door open and close. His eyes snapped open, but his body wouldn't move. It was as if a weight, heavy as a ton of bricks, was pressing him down. He tried to stay calm, reminding himself not to be afraid, but then came the whispers, soft, almost too faint to hear, but unmistakable. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sound sent shivers through him. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever haunted his childhood home might have followed him here. The following nights were no better. Last night, while lying on the bed with his girlfriend, the two of them heard a man's whistle. Brian didn't want to mention it, assuming it was just his imagination, but when he looked at her, she was pale as a ghost. She had heard it too. They both felt the same overwhelming dread, and for a moment, they considered leaving the house entirely. Now Brian feels like he's out of options. He's planning to bless the house tonight and has even called a priest, who assured him it should help. But he's still nervous, unsure of what might happen or if this will be enough to put an end to the disturbances. So, what should he do? If you've ever dealt with something like this, leave your advice in the comments. Has anything followed you after you moved? And if so, how did you make it stop? Tonight, I want to share a story of Shanna, who has experienced a series of vivid, angelic, and devilish dreams that began after her grandfather's passing. These dreams are deeply personal, filled with symbolism and emotion, and they've left her questioning their meaning and seeking answers. Let's dive in. Shanna's experiences started in September 2006, not long after her grandpa passed away on Labor Day weekend. One morning, she woke up early to see her husband, Tommy, off to work. After he left, she debated whether to start her day or try to catch a little more sleep. She pulled the comforter up to her neck and settled into that half-awake, half-asleep state when she began to feel an undeniable presence in the room. It started with a sensation, a weight pressing down on the comforter at the foot of her bed. Slowly, it moved up her legs, growing heavier with each passing moment. Then came the sound, a roaring, whirling wind at the foot of the bed on her right side. Shanna felt paralyzed, gripped by fear. She knew she was dreaming, yet it felt so real. In the middle of the roaring sound, she heard a single word spoken clearly: Jewel. I am Jewel. The presence on the bed felt overwhelming, almost suffocating, and in her fear, she screamed, "No," and woke up, gasping for air. She didn't dare go back to sleep, her heart pounding from the vivid experience. That day, she couldn't shake the memory of the dream. She told her friend Renette about it, and the two of them spent the day trying to make sense of what happened. That evening, Shanna turned to the internet for answers, searching for connections between angels and the name Jewel. She stumbled across a passage on a website that seemed to resonate with her deeply. It spoke about the jewel nature of your soul, describing how the gifts we carry are reflections of divine love, meant to be shared freely. To Shanna, it felt like a message. Perhaps her guardian angel, Jewel, was waking her up from the oppressive presence in her dream and guiding her toward her purpose. But this wasn't the only dream Shanna experienced that month. A few days later, she had another, far darker encounter. In this dream, Shanna was lying on her back, and her lifelong fear of something lurking under the bed came to life. She felt the comforter on her leg flip over, leaving her exposed. Then slowly, she began sliding down the side of the bed, as if being pulled toward the floor. She tried to call out for Tony, but when she managed to make a sound, her voice came out deep and guttural, nothing like her own. When Tony finally turned to look at her, it wasn't him. His face was distorted, his teeth yellow and protruding, his eyes filled with a sinister light. He pulled her back onto the bed, leaned in close, and then, his tongue wasn't human. It was thin and wiggling, like a snake. Shanna woke up in a panic, gasping for air, and clung to Tony for comfort. But the nightmare didn't end there. As she tried to fall back asleep, the dream began again. This time, she was aware of what was happening and tried to fight it, mumbling Tony's name in her sleep. Thankfully, her muffled cries woke him up, and his voice snapped her out of the dream. The sound of him speaking brought instant comfort, but the memory of the experience lingered. Tony, ever the joker, teased her about the dream the next day, imitating the devil voice she had described. Shanna laughed along, but deep down, the dream left her unsettled. Was it just a reflection of her fears, or something more? These experiences began not long after her grandfather's death, which Shanna believes may have triggered them. On the day of his burial, she had a powerful moment while driving. She pulled over to capture a photo of the rays of light breaking through the clouds, a sight she associated with angel wings. When she examined the photo later, she and her family noticed something incredible: two distinct figures in the light. One appeared to be blowing a horn, while the other held a sword. Shanna felt certain these were angels, but what they were trying to tell her, she still doesn't know. Shanna's story is one of fear, faith, and the search for meaning. Was Jewel her guardian angel, protecting her from darker forces? Were the dreams connected to her grandfather's passing? Or could they be something else entirely? If you've ever experienced vivid dreams like these or found yourself caught between the light and the dark, share your thoughts in the comments below. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened about 6 years ago. At the time, I was living in an attic bedroom in my family home. It was the kind of space that felt quiet and removed from the rest of the house, which I liked, but it also made the experience I'm about to share all the more unsettling. One night, I was asleep when I suddenly woke up. It was somewhere between 2 o'clock and 2:30 in the morning. Strangely, I didn't feel groggy or disoriented. I was wide awake, as if someone had flipped a switch. Without thinking, my eyes immediately landed on a candle holder on top of my TV. It wasn't something I had paid much attention to before. It was a simple, bowl-shaped holder made of silver, with cut-out patterns on the sides meant to cast light in decorative shapes when a candle was lit. But what caught my attention wasn't just the candle holder itself. It was that it was spinning, slowly, steadily, and completely on its own. Light from the street lamp outside filtered through my translucent curtains, bouncing off the polished silver and casting shifting patterns on the walls and ceiling. The effect was mesmerizing. I sat there, staring at it for what felt like 5 minutes, captivated by the strange, beautiful sight. Then, as though nothing had happened, I laid back down and fell asleep. The same thing happened the next night. I woke up at nearly the same time, eyes automatically drawn to the candle holder, which was spinning again. It wasn't something I was looking for. It was as if it was calling me. And just like the first night, I watched it for a few minutes, then went back to sleep. This continued for about 5 or 6 nights. Each time I woke up, looked at the candle holder, and watched it spin in silence. I wasn't scared, at least not at first. If anything, I felt curious, like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see but couldn't look away from. But on the last night, everything changed. I woke up as usual, and my eyes found the candle holder again. This time, I decided to really focus on it. I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining things or tricking myself into seeing something that wasn't there. I sat up straight, leaning forward as much as I could without getting out of bed. That's when I saw it wasn't just spinning. It was floating. The candle holder was hovering about 2 inches above the TV, turning slowly in the dim light. Fear washed over me. My heart raced, and I felt paralyzed. This wasn't something I could explain away, and for the first time, I was truly terrified. I slammed back down onto my bed, pulling the covers over me like a child trying to hide from a monster, and squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see it anymore. I just wanted it to stop. The following night, I woke up again around the same time. But this time, I didn't dare look at the candle holder. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. I didn't want to know if it was spinning or floating again. I stayed like that, trembling, until I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Years later, I still don't have an explanation for what I experienced during those nights. Was it something beyond logic, or could it be a trick of my mind? A sleep disorder, maybe? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was a warm summer night in mid-July, one of those nights where everything feels quiet and alive all at once. My cousin and I were snuggled in bed together, the kind of childhood closeness where every secret and every laugh felt like a shared treasure. The crickets outside sang their steady song, and the soft glow of lightning bugs danced in the darkness beyond the window. I lay there, staring out into the night, soaking in the peacefulness. But that tranquility didn't last. As I lay there, lost in the stillness, I heard it. Footsteps. They echoed softly in the loft above us, each step slow and deliberate, carrying an eerie weight. I froze, my heart beating faster as I listened. There was something about the sound that felt wrong. It wasn't the normal creak of an old house settling. It was purposeful, like someone, or something, was walking. I didn't dare move or speak. I just lay there, straining to hear more, until eventually the footsteps stopped. Somehow, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, as my cousin and I played with our dolls, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her about the footsteps I'd heard. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she nodded solemnly and admitted she'd heard them before too. I always try to fall asleep before they start, she confessed, her voice low. Her admission sent a shiver down my spine, but it also sparked something else. Curiosity. We decided that night we would stay awake together and figure out what, or who, was walking in the loft during those strange, late hours. The day passed in a blur of excitement and nervous anticipation. When night fell, we lay side by side under the covers, giggling softly as we waited for the footsteps to come. The house felt still, the air heavy with expectation. Hours passed, and just as sleep began to pull at us, the sound returned. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when we heard it, the same deliberate steps, moving slowly across the loft. My cousin and I pinched each other in silent panic. our tiny act of bravery. The footsteps grew closer, each one louder, more defined, until they stopped right above our heads. I lay there, paralyzed, staring through the covers as if they could shield us from whatever was there. But I didn't see anything. I didn't dare look any further. The next morning, my cousin told me she had seen something. While I hid under the blanket, she had peeked out just enough to catch a glimpse. She swore she saw the figure of an old man standing by the window, his presence faint but undeniable. Her description made my stomach twist with both fear and wonder. Whether people believe in ghosts or not, I know what I heard that night. My cousin knows what she saw. It's hard to explain, and maybe we'll never have answers, but that night stayed with us. It became a story we'd whisper to each other for years, a reminder that some things defy explanation. Maybe ghosts really do exist. Maybe spirits are all around us, whether we notice them or not. For those who haven't had an encounter, it's easy to dismiss the idea. But for those of us who felt it, heard it, or even seen it, there's no doubt. Something lingers, and on nights like that one, it makes itself known. I want to share something that happened to me many years ago, back in 1989, when I was just 12 years old. I've kept these incidents to myself for so long, but I've realized it's time to talk about them. Until now, I've just prayed and tried to move on, convincing myself there must be some logical explanation. But after all this time, I can't ignore what I've seen and felt. At that time, my family lived in a house that used to be my dad's office, which was later converted into a home. The house didn't have a proper water supply, so we had to fetch water from a factory nearby, about 800 meters away. It was such a tiring task, especially carrying buckets of water back and forth, so we eventually set up a plastic hose from the factory tap to our house to make things easier. One Saturday afternoon, around 2:00 p.m., my mom went to the factory to turn on the tap. But when she came back, there was no water. She thought there might be a leak in the hose and asked me and my sister to go check. We weren't exactly thrilled about it, so we grabbed our bicycles instead of walking. The path to the factory was eerie. Behind our house was a Muslim cemetery, and the area around the factory was overgrown with bushes. It wasn't a place where you'd expect to see anyone. As we approached the factory, something caught my eye. A woman, dressed in a traditional Indian costume, standing near a large tree. She was beautiful, but her presence was deeply unsettling. We were the only Indian family in the area, and there was no way someone could reach that spot. It was surrounded by thick bushes and completely inaccessible. She stood perfectly still, just beside the factory office near a wide drain. I froze, staring at her in shock. My sister and I didn't say a word. We slammed down our bicycles and ran home as fast as we could. When we told my mom what we'd seen, she was silent at first, then admitted she had experienced something strange at the factory too. She said she'd heard a male voice calling out, "Ma, ma, ma," even though no one else was there. I swear on everything that I saw that woman. I never believed in ghosts before that day, but after this incident, I had no choice but to believe. That wasn't the only strange encounter I've had. Another happened late one night, around 2:00 a.m., as I was walking home from the temple after a special prayer. I saw an old man, unusually tall and with a strange gait, walking about 500 meters ahead of me. I could see him clearly, but as I walked closer, he seemed to fade away into the darkness. Then there's the house I live in now. I'm convinced it's haunted too. I've heard noises late at night, unexplained sounds that make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My dog often barks at nothing, as if sensing something I can't see. Once, I even saw a strange white smoke lingering in the kitchen for no reason. The most unsettling moment happened just yesterday. I was taking a shower when suddenly, the bathroom door started to open, as if someone was pulling it from the outside. I froze, terrified. Grabbing my clothes, I screamed at my niece, thinking she was playing a prank on me. But when I checked, she was sitting in the living room, quietly playing with her doll. The house was empty except for the two of us. These experiences have changed the way I see the world. Ghosts exist. I have felt their presence, and I know they're real. But I also believe that no matter how strong they may seem, our faith in God is stronger. When these things happen, I remind myself to trust in Him and stay brave. My dad has a friend, and I'm pretty sure his friend's daughter can see spirits. She's 7 years old, autistic, and slowly losing her hearing. Right now, she can still hear fairly well, but the doctors have said that she'll eventually go completely deaf. What's remarkable is that despite her challenges, or maybe because of them, she seems to have this unique ability to sense things most of us can't. If you've read my water heater story, you'll know I've always thought there's a spirit living in my dad's house. One day, I was over there with the girl and her mom. The three of us, her mom, my dad, and I, were talking while she played quietly with her dolls nearby. At some point, she got up and walked to the door of the computer room. She just stood there, staring into the empty space. She communicates mostly through sign language, so we didn't think much of it at first. But then, we noticed she was signing something over and over again. Her mom said she was signing the words, "Pay attention," repeatedly, directing her message at the empty room. It was as though she were talking to someone. No, to several people. Her mom said it seemed like she was scolding 2 or 3 individuals, getting visibly frustrated when they wouldn't listen. We asked her, "Who were you talking to?" She just turned and looked at us without answering. Then we asked, "What are their names?" And she replied, "I don't know." That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing something, or someone. We couldn't. Another time, something happened while she was staying at a babysitter's house. Her mom told me that everything had been fine until, out of nowhere, she freaked out and started crying uncontrollably. The babysitter, unsure of what was going on, called her mom and asked her to come pick her up. When her mom brought her home, she tried to ask what had upset her so much, but the girl wouldn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day, not for an entire week. She stayed completely silent. Finally, when she did speak, she told her mom what had happened. She said that while she was at the babysitter's house, she saw a man and his son standing by the staircase. They didn't say anything, but she said they were scaring her. Just the thought of it gave me chills. There's one more thing I need to share, something that happened to the girl's sister when she was younger. When her sister was about 3 years old, she refused to sleep in her own room. She'd throw fits every night, begging not to go in there. Her mom eventually managed to convince her one night, tucking her in as she always did. But while she was trying to calm her daughter down, she noticed the girl staring off into space, her little face frozen in fear. "What are you staring at?" her mom asked, trying to understand. The girl didn't hesitate. "The lady standing behind you," she said. Her mom spun around, but of course no one was there. Later, the family found out that the previous owner of the house, an elderly woman, had passed away there. To this day, people who visit that house say it has a strange, heavy energy. There are even those who refuse to go back after being there a few times. I've never been myself, but hearing these stories, I'm not sure I ever want to. These experiences have left me with more questions than answers. Do spirits really linger around us, or is there something special about some people, like this little girl, that allows them to see what the rest of us can't? Whatever the case, I know one thing for sure. There are things in this world that defy explanation, and stories like this make it hard to deny. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever experienced something similar or know someone who has, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories like this. My mother and I were talking last night, and I happened to mention something odd that had recently occurred in my room. That led us to a conversation about the strange experiences our entire family had when we lived in an old, decrepit trailer in Valdez, Alaska. We moved out when I was 7, but those events have stayed with us ever since. When I was about 4 years old, I had a bunk bed and always slept on the top because the shadows on the floor scared me. I liked being close to the wall, away from the edge, because I was terrified of falling. One night, I heard whispering, soft and persistent, as though someone was calling my name. I ignored it, trying to fall back asleep, but the whispering didn't stop. It came closer, so close I could feel breath against my ear. When I still didn't respond, I felt strong hands grab me, lift me into the air, and then drop me. I fell hard onto the floor, landing on my toys and books. My room was a mess, completely trashed. I started crying, and my mom came rushing in. She thought I had fallen out of bed and scolded me for making such a mess. The next day, she refused to take me to my grandma's until I cleaned up my room. I spent over an hour putting everything back in place, but just as I finished, I thought I heard my mom calling me from the other end of the trailer. When I went to ask what she needed, she told me she hadn't called me but asked to see my room. We walked back together, only to find it completely trashed again. I stood there in shock while my mom left me to clean it all over again. As I picked things up, I heard faint laughter behind me, almost like taunting. I turned around, frustrated, and yelled, "That's not funny. Stop it right now." After that, I cleaned the room again, and this time it stayed clean. Another time, my mom was home alone. She was standing in the kitchen on the phone with my grandma when something caught her attention. There was a big yellow door leading to a storage area we never used, and as she stared at it, it began to open slowly on its own. She dropped the phone and ran straight out of the trailer, heading for my grandma's house. She refused to go back in until someone else was with her. My dad had a terrifying experience of his own. He told me about a dream he had where he floated out of his body. He saw himself and my mom lying asleep in their bed, but as he looked toward the closet at the foot of the bed, he noticed something strange. The closet had mirror doors, and he felt himself being pulled toward them. Ghostly hands reached out from the mirror, grabbing his legs and trying to pull him into the glass. On the other side of the mirror, he saw a strange, cold world. He struggled to free himself and suddenly woke up. The bed was soaked with sweat, and he was so shaken that he refused to sleep in the bedroom again. From that night until we moved out, he slept on the couch. The last thing I remember happened when I was 7. My mom, my little brother, and I had just come back from the store. It was late afternoon, and as we opened the door, we saw something we couldn't explain. A large goblet that my mom kept on top of the TV lifted itself into the air, hovered for a moment, and then shot across the room, smashing into the wall. My mom and I didn't say a word. We closed the door, turned around, and went to my grandma's house instead. Even now, I still wonder what was happening in that trailer. These memories make me believe that some things simply can't be explained. This happened about an hour ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. It's been recurring for the past hour, but seems to have stopped for now, at least for the past 10 minutes. I was sitting at my desk, working on an essay for school, and my phone was off. I turned it off deliberately because my friend kept calling me, and I needed to focus. I really turned it off. No standby mode, no silent mode, just completely off. I had my music playing, my room lights on, my computer running, all pretty normal stuff. Then my phone started ringing. I instinctively picked it up, and it was my friend calling. I talked to her for about a minute, but as soon as I hung up, it hit me. I turned my phone off. I double-checked, and sure enough, it was off. Completely off. Confused, I grabbed the house phone and called her back. I asked if she just called my cell phone, and she said yes. That was enough to give me chills, but I tried to brush it off. "Okay," I said, and hung up. A few minutes later, my music stopped. I figured it was just a glitch in iTunes, so I checked, but everything looked fine. Then I checked my speakers. Still nothing. I even fiddled with the volume dial. Again, nothing. At this point, I was leaning in close to the speakers, trying to hear any static, when the music suddenly blasted back on at full volume. I screamed, not because I was scared, but because the noise was so loud it hurt my ears. I tried to calm down and went back to my essay, determined to finish it despite all these weird interruptions. That's when my computer turned off and then immediately turned back on, all in a matter of seconds. I was annoyed, sure, but mostly confused. First my phone, then my speakers, and now my computer. It felt like more than just bad luck or a series of glitches. I went to ask my dad if anything strange had been happening in the house. He said no, everything was normal. Even if there was something weird going on with the electricity, it wouldn't explain my phone turning on or my music behaving like that. Feeling unsettled, I went back to my room. The moment I stepped in, I felt off, like something was different. I looked around and noticed my phone was on. My iPod was on. Even my camera was